every single person in pre-RAS picked up a rock and just went boom, and it was like doo, 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 like in slow-mo, you know, this guy's just getting pebbles, like hit by pebbles, and he goes, ah, that's it, and he walked into the office and quit. And I was like, dude, this is selection right here. I was like, this is just testing everyone's patience. My name's Cameron Fath. I was active duty U.S. Army for 4.5 years, from 2014 to the end of 2018, and then I was California National Guard from 2018 to 2023. I was born in Los Angeles, California. I grew up in Thousand Oaks, California, which is about 45 minutes north of like downtown. Super typical childhood, like never really faced adversity. I grew up in the suburbs, man. I had like both parents until middle school. They got divorced, which, you know, people were like, oh, growing up, I had such childhood trauma. It's like, dude, it's not such a big deal, you know? I struggled with like ADHD and ADD. Like, I was just one of those kids that would jump off the walls and was hard to control. School was really challenging for me, just sitting down and focusing. I remember every like teacher I've ever had was like, this kid sucks. You know? My mom would like go tooth and nail with like the principals. Just like, I moved around a bunch of schools. I think I went to like a private Christian school, and then I went to a public school, and then I just bounced around. In high school, I went to 2 different high schools. One was in Thousand Oaks, and then I spent a year in independent study, basically the fancy way of saying homeschooled, because I just was not getting my grades. After that, I finished up at a place called Westlake High School, and that's where I got my diploma at. My goal was always to join the military. Typical kids are like, I want to go to Harvard to be like president of the United States or some bullshit like that. But no, I wanted to go in the military ever since I was, you know, this tall, which I'm kind of still this tall. In my mindset, I just have to pass, right? I'm not going to college. I never took my SATs. I didn't do anything. I just wanted to enlist. What inspired me to go in the military, I still ponder that too, because I'm first generation in my family on both sides, volunteer military. I didn't have any like military figures in my life that I'm like, wow, like that is super cool. I just had an unrelenting interest in everything guns, tactics. I remember I was super into airsoft growing up. Ever since I was like 13, 14 years old, I would like always want to buy guns. And my mom, you know, she grew up in East LA. She's like, was in the hood, man. Like, we never had guns in the house. I think I went to the firing range one time when I was 17, and that was the first time I ever got to shoot a real gun before joining the military. But I'd put hundreds of hours just playing with fake guns on like the airsoft field or at home. So I'd have like all the tactical gear and all the know-how. I remember when Magpul was like, you know, when they were a baby company first coming out with like Magpul Dynamics, which was like those video series, you know, when there was like P90X coming out and everyone was just lifting it home, watching these guys on TV. Well, Magpul Dynamics, for the people that don't know, was basically P90X for guns. And I remember just watching the videos on YouTube because my mom didn't even let me buy them. So like just ripping them from the internet and just like watching them and doing everything on my airsoft guns that they were teaching. So that was like really pushing me in that direction. And then as soon as I was old enough to walk into a recruiter office, I did. Yeah, I ended up going with the Army, but they weren't the first guys I actually talked to. I was actually depped in the Marine Corps. Thousand Oaks had a Marine recruiting office, and, you know, that was the first place I went because everybody that doesn't know, you know, assumes that the Marines is the best branch. It's a total lie. No offense, but but no, I walked in the Marine because, you know, that's who I knew was like first to the fight. I mean, you watch the commercials growing up of dudes just getting off of the amphibious, you know, vehicles and just running onto dry land, bullets flying, and they're like, we run towards fire. And I'm like, that's what I want to do, you know, all big-eyed kid. And so I walked in the Marine office, and, you know, I was literally had my Poolie shirt, and I like had the Marine Corps lanyard that I'd wear every day to school. And I thought that was it. And I had like a Marine Corps, I had a Marine recon contract because I wanted, you know, special operations was always my goal in a way, but I never really knew how to get there. I just knew that was it. I just had to take my ASVAB, and then, you know, my mother met with the Marine recruiter, and she, like, afterwards, she, like, came up to me and she's like, you know, she's like, I knew you were going to join the military forever. She's just like, make the right decision. And she Googled military budgets. And then, yeah, she like, I saw that the Marine Corps had the lowest budget out of all of the military. It's Department of the Navy. And, you know, growing up, I was a big gear guy. So I was like, I want the best shit. immediately walked into the Army recruiting office, and then it was over. It was like they showed me their budgets, they showed me everything I could do, and I was like, I guess I'm joining the Army now. But I had a really positive experience with the Army recruiters. I had two infantry guys, and in the recruiting station, for people that have never walked in, the recruiters are from different units, from different jobs. They have different experience all over the military. So I knew for a fact that I wanted to be infantry. I wanted to be a combat MOS. Thankfully, the two recruiters that I mainly dealt with were both infantry guys. Now, none of them were Rangers or none of them were special operations, but they were still, what I imagined infantry guys to be. They were just ginormous. They drove Mustangs with high APRs. Like, they were your classic grunt, just, crushed weights and were just behemoths of men. So I was like, that's cool. That's what I want to do. I was kind of a little shit as a kid. Like, if I ran into myself on the street, I probably would kick my ass, because I was like always just trying to be the center of attention, just trying to be cool when you didn't need to be cool, right? I was always trying to make everybody like me. I was trying to infiltrate all the cool popular groups, and just typical kid shit where, there's a lot of pressure in the social circles, and trying to fit in was such a, importance back then. And now it's like I could give two fucks about it. I was getting in trouble. I was partying as, in high school. I got in trouble with alcohol throughout my life, and I was just like, it's not cool. But like, I almost didn't get to join the military, because I remember I went to Santa Barbara. University of California, Santa Barbara is just a known party school. Like, getting minor in possession of alcohol there is like getting a fix-it ticket anywhere else in the world. One day I was just going down the frat houses with a couple buddies of mine. I had like a beer in my hand, and I think I was like 17, 18 at the time. And yeah, totally got stopped by the cops, and they're like, here's a ticket for minor in possession. And I thought it was over. Super sad, because I called my recruiter, and he was like, this might be it, man. You might not be able to join the military now. And like, I thought my life was over. So I went through like a super dark period of time where I was just like, everything that I've built towards, or everything that I've wanted, like, what happens when that's just stripped away from you and you just feel like a shell of a person. So thankfully, as I know now, that was all. You can join the military with so much, with so many things against you or on your record. It's not gonna stop you, really, or you just lie. That's literally it. But thankfully, it still let me join the military. Yeah, I ended up enlisting, or doing like the whole early entry program, when I was 16. So I was in like the future soldier for 2 years before I actually left for basic training. That's how like I knew I wanted to join the Army, or at least join the military. Nobody really expected me to join the military, because I was literally a professional hip hop dancer in my youth. I'd travel around the country and like compete in a co-ed male and female hip hop team, and I did that with my sister. That's how my mom my mom wanted my sister and I to have something in common, so she enrolled us in dance really early on. So I like grew up breakdancing, and I grew up like doing hip hops and popping a lock. Yeah, watching like Step Up, and all these. You Got Served was like on repeat at my house all the time. Actually, before I left for the military, this was kind of like my crossroads, just in case this happened. I was on America's Got Talent. With like this like boys group that they put together, and it was looking back on it, it was so fucking dumb. It was like, we were like literally a boy band, and there was 2 points in my life that I was in a boy band growing up. There was like one that was started by a big producer that had like an all boys group called Mindless Behavior, and they wanted to basically, and they were all brothers, right? They were all, African Americans, and they wanted to create like a white boy group called First Class, which looking back on it would have been terrible. I was in that, and it fell apart, and like they put together a new group, and we went on America's Got Talent, and like I performed for like Howie Mandel and all that, and we just didn't make it. They say there was like some stuff with like our producer and Nick Cannon saying like they never got together really well, like they didn't get along, and they actually hated each other. So they were like, that's why you guys didn't get on the show, because there was beef. And I'm like, or we just sucked. It could have just been that. But yeah, after we didn't get on, that was like, okay, yeah, I'm 100% going in the military now. I came from that background, so I decent cardio. Just dancing is great exercise. When I took my ASVAB, I scored high enough. I got like a 111 GT, surprisingly, and like I think it's 105 or 110 to like almost get every single job in the military, or at least in the Army. I remember I was sitting there, and we're going over my ASVAB scores, and my recruiter was like, hey, I got a Ranger contract if you want it. And I'm like, what's that? I had no idea what Airborne Ranger was. All I knew was that you could play one in Call of Duty and like Modern Warfare 2, and I'm like, I thought you had to like, do 10 years minimum in the big army and then had to try out or whatever. And I had no idea that you could just walk in and, secure that type of contract. So I said, oh, absolutely. I was like, give it to me. Even if I fail, I at least want to try. So I remember getting that Ranger contract and I like took a picture of it and it said like Cameron Fath, Ranger contract, ship date. And I was like, fuck yeah, and I remember sitting there and I was like getting emotional because like, this is it, man. This is everything you wanted to do with your life. But I knew zero about the job. When I went through, it's not like it is today where you can Google like everything to expect. It was still pretty early on where, especially in the Rangers, like they are kind of the epitome of silent professional. And it was so emphasized when I was in there that like, hey, you don't talk about shit. My ship date was like, I was waiting for it like my birthday. It was such an important day to me. And I remember my ship date was literally, I think 4 or 5 days after I threw my, little graduation hat in the air for high school. Like the second I got my diploma, 3 days later, I was on a bus going to Fort Benning, Georgia. So I didn't have a summer. My summer was basic training. So I remember, going down to MEPS, and that place is just, I don't like MEPS. It's just crazy. And, I actually, when I said I got in trouble with alcohol, the day before I left, I was driving in my car at a partying. I was like at a party and it was like a going away party and I drove my mom's car and I ended up getting pulled over and I had alcohol in my system. And I remember I was like, uh-oh, like this is strike number 2, man. Like strike number 2. I was so focused on just being cool that I wasn't focused on my career and I wasn't focused on like the rest of my life, which, once you graduate high school, you realize like those are the fun times, but it's like 5% of your life. So I was like so focused on then and now, and I was just doing stupid stuff. So I remember getting pulled over, and I had like, obviously was driving drunk. She was very cool. She was like, "Oh, you literally leave." I literally left for MEPS the next day or in the morning, and I'm like, "This could be it. Like I already had the minor possession of alcohol thing. Now I'm getting in trouble with it again." Moral of the story is alcohol is not your friend. Anyways, so she lets me go. My mom picks me up. I remember she was furious. She dropped me off at MEPS, didn't say a word, didn't say goodbye, good luck or anything. She was just like, get out. She's like, you're done. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it was a little upsetting time because I like pissed my mom off so much because I was just being a shit. Got on the plane, I landed in Benning, and like I just remember being picked up by all like the recycles. They all had, they're all like yelling at you. They're like, ooh, look at that guy. He's got nice hair. That's all coming off, buddy. And I'm like, this is stupid. And then they ship you to 30th AG, which is it's purgatory. It is literally purgatory. It's before you actually get to the basic training class, and that's where they in-process you to the Army. You get your uniform, they shave your head, they give you all your injections and vaccinations, and it's like literally just like a machine line. There's 2 guys on each side, and you're just walking through in line, like conveyor belt style, and they're just putting needles in your arm, injecting you with who knows what. And then you just go on to the next guy, get your head shaved. You go on to the next guy and they take a picture for your ID. And it's just like a week of that. And it's the worst place I've ever been in my life because everybody has no idea what's going on. And not to mention, you're just exposed to every single type of person in the United States because they're coming from all over. And it's just, there's a lot of different personalities. There's a lot of fighting going around because people just don't agree. They come from different backgrounds. And it's just, and then your first exposure to the drill sergeants, now like some of these guys you're just immediately getting yelled at by like, they're not the worst drill sergeants, but like they're drill sergeants still, and it's just not a cool time. And this is like your first shock to the military. So I got shipped off to my basic training company, and I just remember being in first platoon. It was like our nickname was like the Widowmakers, and that's when it started. It was like, dude, we're here, we're doing it. And I never thought basic training was challenging. Or at least a lot of people are nervous, especially if they hit me up and they're like, hey, how can I prepare for basic training? How can I prepare for like Ranger selection or anything? Umbrella, like it just sucks. And basic training might not be the most physically demanding place in the world. It is for some people, especially if you're not coming from like an athletic background. Luckily, before in high school, I was a dancer. The most challenging thing about basic training is just the people. this is where if you don't have really good communication or you lack common sense, if you will, that's the most challenging thing, especially when they start picking like leadership positions, because they place the students kind of in charge of, or at least the basic trainings, they place them in charge of each other to an extent until like the drill sergeants come in, because this is where you're first introduced to like structure as far as just like a platoon structure. So there's squad leaders, there's a platoon leader, there's a platoon sergeant. I was immediately put as a squad leader in the beginning, and I had no idea why, because I thought I was just doing the same as everybody else, but I ended up being pretty good at it, and sooner or later I was promoted to the platoon sergeant of my platoon in basic training, and that's where you just learned really how to communicate with people, because like I said, you're dealing with people from every aspect of the United States, which is, to me, is a benefit and also a curse, because you have people that came from really rich childhood. You have people that came from really poor childhood. You have, different cultures, different moral values in this entire room. And you are now have to exist as one cohesive unit and learn how to get along. And most of the time, these guys just didn't. In basic training, I remember just being in charge of like all of the guys and just trying to, I guess, fix everybody's problem. And there were a lot of problems. I remember there was one guy who was from Northern California. He was from Stockton, which doesn't have the best reputation in the world. And actually, he was one of my favorite people in the basic training, because we would flip-flop leadership position. So basically, like, when he was in charge, I would finally have a break, and then he would go until, he got fired for some stupid bullshit, because, obviously these people were a bunch of rapscallions, and then I would be in charge, and I'd be like, oh, great. In the beginning, like, the drill sergeant goes, like, person to person, and in each platoon bay, there would be, like, the middle ground, and it had red tape, like a square red tape around it, and no basic trainees were allowed in the middle if there was a drill sergeant there. And you would have to toe the line. They'd call it towing the line, where everybody would go up and put their feet on that little red tape on the ground, and then the drill sergeant would be in the middle, like, talking. And I remember we were all towing the line. He'd go up one person, one by one, and be like, why do you want to be an infantryman, right? Because in the Army, you do basic training and infantry training in one spot. So it's called one station unit training. So, I was in my platoon for 13, 14 weeks, just in that spot. So that's a little different from like other branches where they do like 8-week basic somewhere else and then go to their job training. It does that in the Army too. But infantry is the only place, I believe, that does it in one spot. So we're towing the line. He's like asking everybody, well, why do you want to be an infantryman? And you basically know what they're going to say. I would like to serve my country. I want to fight the enemy. And they go up to my buddy, and this is one of the most realist answers I've ever heard. And it's my favorite thing that happened in basic training. Was he goes up to my buddy and he goes, why do you want to be an infantryman? And he literally goes, I want to murder people legally. And the drill sergeant, I could see in his face that he was like, that's real. He's like, this guy should be here. This is the type of dude when he turned to everybody and he's like, everybody's giving fucking bullshit answers. This is the first honest dude that has literally stepped up here. And I'm guilty of being like, I always had the call to serve my country, drill sergeant. And then, he gets up there and he's like, I want to murder people legally. And I'm like, don't we all? We just don't want to look like absolute sociopaths. So that was the first kind of introduction to basic training. And that's when the baseline cues, the rest of the memories just go do 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 do, and then basic training is completed. But no, there was so much BS that happened in basic training. Not only do you get thrashed by the drill sergeants if you're not doing things to task condition standard, right? That's the basics. You don't do something right, you're pushing. That's, and then the way they punish us a lot of times. And the worst thing would be at night when everybody's sleeping, right? You take away my sleep, I don't like that. If the fire watch or the guys who were on guard at night, there was always 2 every hour on the hour we'd rotate, and it was fire watch. If they didn't have a proper report, or, they weren't tracking everybody's bunk, or somebody was up and they weren't accounted for, the drill sergeants wake everybody up. And, and then they play games with you. My least favorite thing was the changing drills, which you would you'd be in your PT because you sleep in your physical training, which is just a t-shirt and shorts and socks and your little running shoes, and you'd sleep in that. And you'd wake up and everybody would have to toe the line, and they'd be like, you have, 3 minutes to change into your ACUs, which was the Army's digital camouflage. So then you'd have to run to your locker, and there's 2 people in a little space next to their locker. So you're elbowing each other, trying to change. And then you'd run back to the line and be like, okay, now you have 2 minutes to change back into PTs, and you just literally change back and forth until, and it was tiring because, you know, time hacks are extremely stressful. Playing games like that was not fun, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the next day you have training to do. It's just like, it's not a fun time. But then, so you have like the drill sergeant instructed kind of BS games that are happening. But then you have like the rapscallions and the dudes who just suck in basic training. The ones that don't want to like conform or follow the rules, and just, we refer to them as Blue Falcons, right, in the military. Blue Falcon is an abbreviation for buddy fucker. Like, they just don't care about anybody but themselves and just screw everybody over. And, you know, Blue Falcons typically come in the form of chow thieves, guys who steal from the chow hall, have things they're not supposed to, just very selfish individuals. Especially as a platoon sergeant, I remember having to go, like, going through everybody's lockers and, like, making sure everybody was, you know, had what they were supposed to and didn't have what they weren't supposed to. And I know there was just this one group of guys that would always just have, you know, peanut butter packets and everything they're just not supposed to in their lockers, and you would hear them at night, like, just like little rats, just opening the wrappers, and I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh, I really, like, sitting there in my blanket, I'm like, I just don't want to do this right now. And it's just like dealing with that, because it's just gonna, shit rolls downhill, right? So if they're doing something wrong, we will get caught for it eventually. It's not a matter of, you know, if we're gonna get caught, it's just a matter of when. Because the drill sergeants are very good at what they do. Yeah, there's just a lot of fighting because of that too. I remember, like, the laundry room was that was the brawling zone. That was like the get down, let's solve our problems like men zone. So like in the middle of the night, you would, you know, there would be people fighting and they'd be like, let's go to the laundry room. And that would be like where they would box it out. And, you know, I just remember breaking up so many fights in the basic training laundry room just because, you know, some people just don't get along. You know, it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from. Like, just some people just cannot get along or find ways to. So I think the most important thing that came out of basic training for me personally was just learning how to communicate with all people, you know, learning their styles, because one style might not work for, you know, Johnny over here, but that style might work for like Ronnie, if that makes sense. That's the one thing that came out of basic training. It wasn't necessarily how to be a good soldier, but if you know, if you took the time and applied yourself, you definitely learned how to be a better person, because you could really learn how to de-escalate. Or if you just didn't give a crap, you just became a terrible person. And that's like your crossroads into your military career there. Since I had a Ranger contract, I immediately went, I remember I got my beret and I had like I had like 1 day of family time, and immediately got on a bus, and then they walked and bused me to airborne school. I immediately went to airborne school. I didn't take any block leave or anything. It was not, it was a little challenging just getting dropped off at airborne school, because, you know, you saw your friends that you just, you know, struggled with and went through real big hardship, which is the best maker of bonds, if you ask me. So you see them leave, they go home, they go to their units, but then you also see the people you leave, or the people that you absolutely hate and couldn't stand, leave. So that was nice. But they're all going home and, you know, about to go to their next, or just going straight to the unit. I had airborne school, I had Ranger assessment and selection to still go to. So I just literally got walked to airborne school and immediately in process there. It's weird, you know, because you're still in that basic training mindset. Like, my head's still shaved. In a way, it's almost a good mindset to be in, because you just become very successful at things you do, because you're still in that, I'll just do as I told. I'm not an individual. I am part of a cohesive unit. So like, it works for military schools. But it's like my first exposure to big army now. You know, I no longer have daddy drill sergeant over my shoulder being like, do this. Never jumped out of a plane. You know, I knew it was something that just needed to be done. But if you ask me if I had a desire to do it, I'd say like 50-50. I mean, obviously, in my mind, you know, especially watching old World War II documentaries and hearing about like the 101st and the 82nd, and not to mention like Band of Brothers, which was out during the time I was going through airborne school. It was just like a lineage, a very honorable lineage to be part of. So 50% of me was like, I gotta jump out of a plane. And then 50% of me is like, oh yeah, I get to jump out of a plane. I started airborne school, and that was, honestly, in my opinion, airborne school can be done in 3 days. 3 days tops, but it's 2 or 3 weeks long. And it's one of the dumbest schools in the entire military. And and I say that confidently now, because you're separated into platoons just like in basic training, and then the actual skill of jumping is not difficult, right? I mean, people think, especially when I was there, I thought like when you jump the parachute, you can steer it. And like, I've done paragliding before I joined the military. I think it was like my 16th birthday I did paragliding. And like when you land on a paraglide, you know, the parachute's really nice. So you can, you know, you can put the toggles down and it kind of gives you lift. So then you could just stand and, you know, do a running landing. In airborne school, it is not that. You literally just hit the ground like a pile of shit. There's a proper way to do it. They call it a parachute landing fall or a PLF, where it's like you're supposed to, you know, land on the balls of your feet, and then you go to your leg, and then your thigh, and then to your butt, and then to your back. You like are basically like rolling, but it usually ends up being like balls of the feet, face, ass, you know, back on the ground. It never works out. When I first learned, like, oh my God, you just hit the ground and just hope you're not injured in a way. And I'm like, this kind of sucks. I was expecting like, you know, kind of like Halo, what you see in Godzilla when they're all jumping out of the plane and like just free falling through the sky. I thought that was airborne school, and I was totally dead wrong. They do like PT sessions. They have like the big PT test in the beginning, and there's like that whole rumor that I think it's called like the 47 Club, because you need like 48 push-ups to pass. But like some of they call them Sergeant Airbornes or the Black Hats. They'll like, even if you get to 47, like every push-up you do, they'll be like 47, 47, 47. Go all the way down, extend your arms, and then they'll drop people from the course like that. Luckily, that never happened to me. But you do your first initial PT test, and then from that point on, if you pass it, you're just standing outside all day, just either practicing falling on the ground, doing the slowest cadence run you'll ever do in your life. I remember in the beginning for PT, like you would jog and just do cadence for like 2 or 3 miles. And it was such a pathetic jog that you could like fast walk it if you really wanted to, and they'd still have people falling out. And I thought that was absolute absurd. But so you're doing that, and then after you finish PT for the day, you're literally practicing falling on the ground. Like they have these little elevated benches that are about like 3 or 4 feet off the ground, and you legit just get on top of it, and you like prepare. They're like, prepare to land left side, and you like face on your left side, and they go jump, and you go airborne, and you just jump off and literally practice falling on the ground. And you do that all day. And then so like it just sucks, and you're landing on these little tiny rocks, and they get in your boots, and it's just not fun. And then when you're not doing that, they have like these mock-ups of the planes where like you practice, you know, the hooking up, and then you practice like shuffling to the door, and you actually jump out of these mock-ups, and they're like 30, 40 feet in the air, and you're attached to this like zip line wire thing, and that's how you actually practice like your exit out. And it's just the most uncomfortable thing ever. And the worst part about that is there is people on detail that are assigned to catch you at the end. So you'll jump out of this thing, you'll like keep snap into a good body position, and then you'll like zip line down, and then there's somebody at the end like trying to linebacker stop you. And it sucked with me. I'm 5'7" at the time. I joined the Army at 135. I graduated basic training at 160. But you know, when somebody that's been in the Army for like 5 years that weighs like 240 pounds and is like 6'3" comes out of that thing, and here's old Private Fath at the end of the, you know, at the end of the thing, and I have to stop this guy, it's just not fun. You know, it's just a recipe for disaster. So that, you know, that was someday. They also have this like swing thing that you literally are on this platform, and then this is how you practice like coming in momentum landing, because you only can get so much experience by jumping off of a table. So they have this swing that you pendulum like this, and then basically right as you're coming down with force, the swing lets go of you, and you just tumble to the ground, and that's kind of how you like practice the momentum fall. And that thing just sucks. So many people are just getting injured on that because, you know, it's just a swing. It's not like the real thing. But they just have all these like medieval devices that somebody in a higher up position was like, this is a great idea, you know? But I'm firmly confident that you could just take 3 days in airborne school, teach them how to land, teach them how to steer the thing, and then have them jump. So after all that stuff, the week and a half of training, you finally jump, and you do 5 jumps at the end of airborne school. So like, if you're going to an airborne unit, you go there with 5 jumps. If you don't go to an airborne unit, you will only have 5 jumps in your military career, and they call you a 5-jump chump. I remember we run down to the rigger sheds, where riggers in the Army are, and they also have them in the Marine Corps. Anybody that really has an airborne like section in the military, they have riggers, which are the guys that pack the parachutes. So you go down to their shed where they keep all the parachutes, and then that's where you start rigging. And that is a miserable process in itself because they are so strict in airborne school. So once you rig up, you're not supposed to touch any of your stuff because like you're inspected by a jump master and they do something called a JMPI, which is a parachute master, jump master parachute inspection. And they essentially make sure everything's working. Because the last thing you want to do is just have some idiot bozo rig himself up and then do something wrong and jump out of the plane and just end up falling to his death because it's not holding him. So they do this JMPI on you, and the second it's done, you sit, you literally have to like sit on your hands or keep them in front of you, and you touch nothing. And from that point, you sit there for hours. You're not allowed to use the bathroom. You're not allowed to do anything. You're just sitting there. I think we sat there for like 6 hours, 5 hours, just waiting to load the birds. And it's just miserable because your helmet's on. You can't take your helmet off because it's part of the JMPI. So you're just sitting there. And the bench is just wood. It's like not padded. They call your chalk. And your chalk is essentially just like the line you're jumping in. And they finally call your chalk and they're like, prepare to load the birds. And I just remember that feeling. It's like, oh, we're finally doing this. All this dumb training that we've done up until this point is finally going to pay off, they say, or so they say. So I just remember, you're standing in the back of the C-130, and that's an experience in itself because you just have this hot air being blown in your face because the engines are running and it's super loud. And that's when you start to get the adrenaline, and that's when it becomes a real moment there because you're like, I'm literally about to just free fall through the air and just hope to a higher power that my parachute opens because, you're not the one pulling the parachute, the plane is. So your trust is in all of your equipment. And, if your main parachute fails, you have a reserve. And if your reserve fails, well, you're just dead. So there's a lot of trust you just need to put in your equipment. So I remember you load the back of the plane, you sit down, and then, you're sitting pretty much sideways as the plane goes, and you're just like kind of race carring because it's super fast and it's fun. And then it smells like diesel fuel in there. So some people are getting sick. And finally we get to elevation and the jump masters tell you to stand up. And that's when you stand up and everybody's trying to like hook their static lines onto the wire in the plane because that's essentially what connects the plane to your parachute. There's like this big yellow cord that comes off your chute and attaches to the plane. And basically when you jump out, it's attached. So it just pulls your parachute out. And then that's how you essentially don't die. So you're hooking up and there's a specific procedure of how you hook up. There's a specific procedure of how you stand, how you're supposed to shuffle, and it's all being like monitored. So the doors open and then what is a seemingly not as loud plane is now an extremely loud plane because you have the wind that's just echoing off everything and you're just getting blasted by air, and all you see is like the ground moving, because you're kind of at an angle to where you see a little bit of a sliver based off where you're standing in the plane, and then you just have to trust that you're just going to go. So I remember I just turned my brain off because I was like, the more you think about this, the more like these things happen. That little voice in your head is like, hey, this probably isn't a good idea. So I just remember I just turned my brain off and I just followed the guy's helmet in front of me. I just like basically was like zombieing it and handed my static line off and just turned and just kind of fell out. And then boom, it was a good jump. Hit the ground, find the landing zone for airborne school. It's not as hard because they like take a tractor through it, so all the dirt is like pretty soft. And I just remember getting, hitting the ground, everything went fine, and then standing up and just taking a deep breath and being like, all right, 4 more. So that was a really cool experience. After airborne school was done, we did our ceremony. They gave me my airborne wings, and I was one of 2 infantry guys that was in my platoon, and our black hat or our sergeant airborne that was kind of in charge of our platoon was an infantry guy too. So when he was pinning on everybody, it was really nice and it was really soft. But there's a tradition in the military called blood wings, and I'm sure there's blood insert name of school here with everything. And a lot of these badges you get in the Army are all pin backed, so they're not like Velcro. So they have little spikies that go in and are secured with like a backer or a fastener. So there's a tradition where you leave the fasteners off, so it's just 2 prongs, and whoever's either promoting you or giving you that award, they hit it as hard as they can so it enters your skin, and that's like how you wear your wings proudly, and they're called blood wings. So I remember we kept making jokes the entire time because I went through in 2014. Like blood wings or any sort of blood anything was considered hazing and was like punishable by UCMJ action, which UCMJ is Uniform Code of Military Justice. So he kept saying like, "Can't wait to get my blood wings," wink, to the black cat, and he's like, "Yeah, right, man." And I just remember he came up to me and he like had this kind of smirk on his face, and I was like, "Are you gonna do it?" And he's like, "Mm-hmm." And I just remember he cocked back and just punched me as hard as he could on my wings, and that shit went right in, and it was like boom. And I was like, "Oh, it hurt so bad." I kind of looked down in my shirt like that, and I just like, saw these two like fangs, and it was all purple like 2 days later, just because he just nailed the crap out of me. But I mean, I wanted that so bad, and it was like, that sounds terrible to a lot of people, but like to me, it was one of the coolest things ever, because now I'm like starting to immerse myself in this army culture and in this infantry culture, because infantry dudes, they're psychopaths. Like, if something sucks, they're like, "That's terrible. Let's go do it." And that's why I loved the infantry, because it was just a suck fest. So after I got my blood wings, it was immediately, I didn't get to leave, didn't get to do anything. I was immediately entered into Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, which is called RASP 1. So RASP 1 is for E1 through E5, the grade. So basically it's from private to sergeant, and then after sergeant, if you want to go into Ranger Regiment, the 75th Ranger Regiment, you can go to RASP 2, which is E6s through, and like all the officers. So RASP is your gateway to become part of the 75th Ranger Regiment. It's 8 weeks long, and it's separated into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is just an absolute kick in the balls. This is like where they start weeding everybody out. All the weak people, all the weak-minded people, the people that weren't physically prepared to be there, in the first 3 weeks, they're going to be gone. And then in the last, then week 4 through 8, you're just working on kind of skills, but there's still, punishment. You're still in selection process. You're still in the program, but you're doing like, marksmanship week. You're doing like demo week. You're doing kind of mobility stuff. So you're actually practicing skills. But before I classed up to RASP, they took me to pre-RASP, which was the holding unit that you wait until you basically class up. And I remember I got there, and it used to be in this old, beaten up barracks. It like smelled really weird in there, and like all the toilets had like mold coming out from the urinals just because of decades and decades of young guns pissing on them. It's this gross place. When I went through pre-RASP, we actually moved the barracks. So all the privates that were in the RASP barracks had to take everything out of them and move them down the road to the new ones. So now where RASP is done currently, I moved everything into those barracks. So, and the old barracks are now condemned. Like, I'm pretty sure nobody stays in those because A, they're gross, and B, they're haunted as hell. Yeah, and I know they're haunted for a fact because when we were moving, there's a CQ or staff duty shifts. So basically CQ is like you're doing a 24-hour rotation. And just to make sure there's somebody, there in case anything happens administratively or during, work hours. So I remember we still had to pull CQ in the old barracks as everybody was staying and moving into the new ones. So it was just me and another guy staying by ourselves in these barracks. And I remember it was like 12 o'clock at night, and I'd be sitting there, and my buddy was like, "Oh, I'm going to run to the PX. Do you want anything?" And I'm like, "Oh, dude, I'm good. I got my book here." And I got my Skull Peach because I was a child and still dipping Skull, like nice flavored dip. And he went away, and I was like in these barracks by myself. And all I remember is just hearing like boots, like on the second floor, just running down, like somebody was sprinting down the hallway. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I kind of like didn't think anything of it until if you go on the second story, there'd be like these giant, really thick wooden doors that took some muscle to move. And I remember they would have the stoppers on the ground so you could keep them open. And there was about 3 floors in this barracks, so everyone was always open. And I do my checks, right? I do my inspections where I'd go up there and check and make sure nobody's like, no hobos are really, camping out in these barracks. And I'm down there, and like all the stoppers, I've never experienced one just magically closing, but I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm reading my book, and I just hear somebody like take off sprinting on the floor above me, and I just hear like boom, 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 and then one of the doors just goes and just slams shut. And at that point, I'm like, all right, fuck me, man. Like something is super weird, and I try to like ignore it because I'm like in this little well-lit room in the bottom floor, and then finally my CQ partner comes back in, and I like turn to him and I'm like, "Hey, dude, did you come back and do inspections or something, or did you like slam the doors up there?" And he's like, "No, man, I've been gone this entire time." And I remember there's like nobody in the barracks, so those barracks are haunted as hell. That was pre-RASP. I was in pre-RASP for 2 months. I got there, and like 2 weeks later, a class went to RASP. They classed up, but we were like over capacity for people that can fit in the class size. So they like kind of pushed me out because I arrived later. So I spent basically another month and a half there waiting for my class, and I finally classed up. And pre-RASP was also miserable. It reminded me of 30th AG because like you wake up in the morning and like it's a lot different now. Now there's like structure and they teach you classes and all this great stuff to make you prepared for RASP. But when I was there, it was literally just you'd wake up, you'd PT, which was like only us because all the actual RASP cadre were busy. So we'd do like 10 push-ups and then they'd be like, "Okay, go shower." And we'd sit all day long until like 3 or 4 from 9 in the morning just on these rocks. And like we'd either read or mess around. And most people just pick up little boulders or little pebbles and just like throw them at each other. And I've never seen like rocks make people quit, because you had to be really tolerant in pre-RASP because there was a lot of different characters. And now you're starting to see like, the personalities come out. And it was a lot different from basic training, because in basic training you had a lot of dumb people, like a surprisingly amount of dumb people. But in RASP you had dumb people who were in shape. So you saw a lot of jokesters, a lot of pranksters, and they would pick up these little rocks and like just throw them, and you'd be sitting there reading, all of a sudden you'd just be like pebbled. You just get smacked by a pebble, and you had to be pretty patient. And you either be like, "Hey, you throw another rock at me, I'm gonna grab this handful and I'm gonna ram it down your throat." And that typically made people want to throw more rocks at you. So, I remember sitting there one time and like, classic games, dudes were like, you put one of your patrol caps out and guys would try to throw rocks into it. That's like big infantry game, let's throw this bowl, let's throw these rocks in the hat, it's super fun. And I remember there's this one guy and he was kind of a loose cannon, and dudes were like kind of throwing rocks at him, and he stands up and he like has this like meltdown, and he's like, "Gah! If one more person throws a rock at me, it's over." Every single person in pre-RASP picked up a rock and just went boom, and it was like doo, 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 like in slow-mo, this guy's just getting like hit by pebbles, and he goes, "Ah, that's it!" And he walked into the office and quit. And I was like, "Dude, this is selection right here." I was like, "This is just testing everyone's patience." And ended up finally classing up, and that was like, oh man, months. Literally waiting 2 months to be here. Finally, it's my moment. And that first day, wow, they just crushed us, absolute crushed us. I think we started with a class of like 165, and we ended up graduating 65, or like close. I think our attrition, or the amount of people that quit, was like 65%. So this is in RASP. Our attrition was like, we had a class of 165 starting, and then we graduated like 62 or 65 guys. So like we had a pretty good class attrition, But it was just, that first week was just like, welcome to hell, dude. That was a time where you just had to turn your brain off, because like it was so physically demanding. And the cadre, those are the dudes, like I still think about them, because like RASP cadre are what your first impression of Rangers are. And they are like all behemoths. They're all super in shape. They're just like the golden boys of Ranger Regiment. And they come from all 3 battalions. And you're just like, wow. I remember one of my RASP cadre was, his name was Sergeant Pemberton. And there's a pretty famous Ranger named Nicholas Irving. He's like the Reaper. He's a sniper. And he was his spotter. And this dude in the book was like fell down a well and like treaded water for like hours waiting to be rescued. And like this guy, this like legend among legends in the RASP cadre community, are like standing in front of me, like teaching me how to be a Ranger. And it's like, dude, and I always, like, I've been a tiny guy my entire life, and every cadre was like 6'2". In RASP, time hacks are huge. So like, I remember one time we stayed on the 2nd floor in these barracks, and the floors had tall ceilings. So like you can only fit actually, no, there's 3 stories. So there were 3-story buildings, if I remember correctly. And in RASP, I stayed on the 3rd story. And there's all these like giant foot lockers and bunk beds that weighed a lot. And I remember one of the time hacks was we had to move every piece of furniture off the 3rd floor and put them below in the rocks. And we had like an hour to do so. And then, we'd get them out there. And then we also had to basically build the barracks on the rocks down on the 1st floor. And we had like an hour or 2 to do it. And it was stressful and everyone's screaming at each other. And we finally did it. And they're like, all right, cool. Now you have an hour to put it back. So like we're carrying all these, these foot lockers must have weighed like 80 to 100 pounds each. And they were too big to carry by yourself. They're probably heavier than that because everyone's possessions were in them, and you're just like moving stuff. So they get really creative. You run everywhere, even to the chow hall. So like you're just sprinting through 375's compound and then waiting to eat. And then you have, I think it was 4 minutes to eat your meal. So they give you breakfast after PT, and PT is always just a smoker in itself. And then you run to breakfast, and you have 4 minutes to eat, and then you stand outside. And then from there, they run you back, and then you do your classes. But during this, you're also getting messed up and doing push-ups and sit-ups. Just basically all your selection type workouts. And then, you do all that stuff, and they run you back for lunch, and then you're just continuing to do all this stuff. But the cool thing about RASP is it ends at the end of the day. So like around 5 o'clock, you're done, you're off. So you literally just have to make it from the morning to 5 p.m. and then you have time to yourself to like prepare for the next day. We might have had like a little time to sprint down to the airborne compound because they had their own DFAC and they were open so we could eat again. So that's pretty much what I would do is right when we were released, I would sprint down to the airborne DFAC and like have another meal to get like more calories and then just stretch the night before. And I remember I bought like this little DVD player from the PX. It was like $30 because as a PFC, I think I was either E2 or E3. I was a private first class. I made like $600 every 2 weeks, which is like, dude, it's the least amount of money ever. Everybody in the military deserves a raise because you do not make enough. So I like bought this little DVD player and I purchased the Band of Brothers DVD collection. So every night before bed, I would watch Band of Brothers and I'm like, this is sick. But then just do it the next day. Coal range is probably the most difficult part of RASP. First day in RASP, you do something called the Doughboy Run. And it's like the night before you class up, the cadre come and they get accountability. And it's like they elect a class leader. And they're like, hey, like you guys, day 1 RASP, you guys got to be up at 6 o'clock, be down here in formation, ready for PT on day 1. It's like, cool. So like everybody sets their alarms at 6 o'clock and then they come busting in at like 5 or 4 and they just are screaming like, get up, everybody, get the fuck up, get downstairs, you got 5 minutes. Everybody's running, and we get down there and then they're like, we're doing the Doughboy Run. And Doughboy is a name of a stadium on Fort Benning, and it's about like 3 miles up the road from the Ranger compound. And what they do is they just get the fastest guy they have on their like cadre lineup, which at the time was this captain, the CO of the RASP kind of leadership, and he could run he could keep like a 4:30 5-minute mile pace. But he would just be at the front and they'd just be like, stay in formation, no matter what you do, don't fall out. And that dude would just take off. And I remember just, I was pretty in shape after basic training. And I could definitely run about like almost max my PT test at that point. I'd run like 13:10s, like almost a 13-minute flat 2 mile. And I just remember just getting this gap widening and in front of me, seeing the guy in front of me, just the gap widening. And then they would stop because what used to be a formation was now like a released ruck march because there was just gaps everywhere. And then they'd go and they'd start circling back and picking up everybody. And then once we got everybody again, he'd just take off again. So it's just like, talk about just a rude awakening to just how in shape guys are in Ranger Regiment. Because, when I got there finally, I realized that people aren't supposed to be able to do these things. Like some of these dudes are just genetic monstrosities. And this was my first like exposure to that. So finally you get to Doughboy and everybody's just like, there's dudes puking and everything. And like you get there and then you start the workout. And it's like, then we get to the stadium, we start just running the stairs and doing push-ups and sit-ups on the thing. And then we get back, and then they're like, okay, grab your ruck. And then we grab our rucks and put on the rucks, and then we do a released ruck march, or we do a formation ruck march. And dudes of Ranger Regiment, they ruck. That's like their job. And they rucked us to it's like the pool on base. And then we did like our pool survival and like water comp kind of thing. And, that's where you get in your flick, which is like the little fighting load carrier vest thing. And you have like a rubber ducky, which is just a mold of an M16, but it has like a metal in it, so it has heavy, and it's the same weight as an actual rifle. And then but it's tied to the vest and everything, and that's where you like jump in and you have to ditch your thing, and then you have to like swim, and you basically do your water survival. And back then it wasn't a pass fail, I think it is now. But after you do that, and I went through in wintertime too. It was December when I started RASP, beginning of December or middle of December I started RASP. So Fort Benning gets super cold. It gets in like the 30s. So after you do your pool comp, you're soaking wet, and then they make you stand outside. So then you're sitting out there, like literally waiting for hundreds of, like 150 guys or however, 165 to just one at a time go through this pool. And if you're number one, you're outside just waiting there, like shivering, and you got the change afterwards, because that's like hypothermia waiting to happen. But still, you're cold, and you're not allowed to wear any of your like snivel gear or anything. You're just sitting there taking the cold. And then I remember there's one time that like we were all formed up and waiting, and one of the RASP cadre was like in this van. He'd be like, give me 3 guys. And some guys are like, oh, like, I don't want to work right now. I don't want to do anything. Because most of the time when they call for people, it's because they either need you to move something, or you're about to be on a really shitty assignment. And I remember I was just like, screw it. And I started sprinting over there, and I was one of the third guys. And he goes, here, get in the car with the warmer. He's like, get in the car with the heater on. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So I remember just sitting there, and like my hands were like kind of doing like the cerebral palsy thing, because it's so cold. And I'm just sitting there on the heater. And like at that moment, I'm like, I get what they want. I understand what they want. They want guys who try. They want guys that put out every single day. They don't want guys that cut corners. And I was like, okay, and it pays to be a winner, right? If I just do what they say, I'll ultimately be successful. So that's kind of how I made my way through RASP. And the first week of doing all this really challenging physically stuff, that's where we saw all the numbers kind of start to go. But then when we hit Cole Range, that was like, yo, man, this shit's real. It was that was one of the most challenging. I think it's 4 nights, 5 days, or 4 days, 3 nights. I don't know. I blacked out. It was just, you're constantly moving, and when you're not moving, you're shivering, and when you're not shivering, you're land nabbing. So essentially, they bust you out, and Cole Range is just this plot of land in the middle of the forest in Fort Benning, whatever you call it. And it's just, that's like Ranger, like hell. And they drop you off there, and they have all these sandbags on the ground. And now it's built up, but when I was there, it was just this open area just surrounded by trees. And it was like probably 400 meters wide. So like it was a good sized space, enough room to run around a lot. So when we got there, I remember it was like an 8-mile ruck march, or we did a ruck march out there. And then once we got there, they like lined us all up, and they elected a new class leader. And immediately out the gate started giving us time acts. And they're like, hey, see those hundreds and hundreds of sandbags that are creating this circle on the ground? We need you to move those like 250 meters over here and make it exactly the way it is now. So like you just have dudes like literally, 2 sandbags just running like 250 meters away, putting them down, sprinting back, because it's not an achievable time hack they don't give. It's like, if you thought that task would take like a pretty good team, maybe an hour to complete, they'd give us 35 minutes to do it. So like, that's just how they instilled kind of stress to see who can really take it. And then obviously we would never make these time hacks, and then they just beat us. There's a very famous wood line, or at least there's a famous saying in Cole Range, which is hit the wood line. And you hear it like every day, every minute on the minute. And it's just once they say hit the wood line, you're running, I think it's like 300 meters down, 300 meters back, so it's like 600 meters. So it's about a little under half a mile, really, to get down there and back. So then you're just doing that all day when you're not land navving. But when you are land navving, you land nav from the morning to the day, and you come back, and then you're literally messed up and getting thrashed and doing classes through the afternoon, and then you do kind of daytime into nighttime land nav, and then you come back and you don't sleep, you just get messed with. I remember they made us like build this giant military tent, and most of the guys going through RASP, I think we had 3 guys that were sergeants, and they came from the big army, but the rest of us were like straight out of basic training. So none of us know how to build this tent, and that was like, oh, we just gotta figure this thing out, because the tent does not look the way it looks, you know, rolled up, how it's supposed to look on the ground. So that was a really challenging task. And then we built this tent, and then like 2 nights later, they told us, like, after, you know, messing us up, they're like, okay, it's probably like 2 o'clock in the morning. They're like literally rucking us around in the dark. And then they're like, you guys go in the tents and just go to bed. They didn't tell us anything other than go in the tents and go to bed. So like we all cram in the tents, and there's just bodies like stacked on top of each other because these tents are tiny. And all I remember is like I looked at my watch, and it was like 2:30 or something, and I just immediately passed out because RASP, you're barely sleeping. And I immediately passed out, and all of a sudden I just remember waking up to this guy screaming in my face, and I look at my watch and it's 2:45, and he's like, get your ruck on, we're going for a run. And then from there it was like we're just running. And then we pick up our rucks, and then we're rucking, and then we fucking put them on top of our heads, and we're lunging down the road with, you know, 35, 45 pound ruck over your head. And it's just that all night. And then the worst part about it was the fact that like it was end of is beginning to be January, so it's just so cold, and they don't let you wear the snivel gear just because it's part of the, you know, being cold is not fun. Like I guarantee you can get rid of, you know, the most athletic people in the world can be broken just by the environment. We'd get there, and if you finished land navving early, you'd just sit there and you'd like shiver. And they would have this ginormous bonfire, and they would be like grilling hot dogs and hamburgers, and it'd be so cold, and you'd see this. And when I say ginormous, it was like a 6-foot wood, you know, bonfire. And then this thing was huge, and you could see it from miles away. And they would just come over and be like, who feels like quitting? If you quit, you can stand by the fire. And it was so cold. It was like 32. It was like just around freezing, and everyone's just sitting there, and you're like jackhammering, and you're just so cold. And if you're doing push-ups, if they see you doing push-ups, they're trying to stay active. They're like, oh, these guys want to do push-ups? We'll do push-ups together as a class. So like you're just sitting there, and you see all the quitters go, and there are dudes quitting left and right, and they're going over there. You see them eating like a hot dog, and they're all laughing and everything because they treat them really nicely. The second you quit, they treat you so nicely. And then I just remember they would come over, the cadre would come over, and he'd like, you know, be screaming at us, and then he'd be like, one of the guys quit, you know, whatever his name was, he'd be like, hey, you need anything? You want a soda? You want another hot dog? You'd be fine. He'd be like, no, I'm really good, Sergeant, thank you. And he'd be like, see that guy? I'll treat you like that if you quit. And, you know, there'd be one guy that'd be like, so pretty much after Coal Range, it was just, after Coal Range, that was like, we made it. Now we just need to make sure we're not getting injured or kicked out for dumb stuff. And then, you know, eventually it was the 8th week, and then we're getting our berets, and that was like the most exciting thing ever. I just remember holding it in my hand and being like, oh, just a couple more days, I can finally don this. And then the ceremony was like, it was such a cool time because they had like this really cool video. It's like the Ranger recruiting video, and then you don your beret, and just everybody's super happy, and you're like, finally. So when you're in RASP, what you get from graduating RASP is you get a tan beret, which is the only authorized headwear for the 75th Ranger Regiment, and then you get a Ranger scroll, which is essentially your unit insignia, but all you get is a scroll. People think Ranger School is the same thing. They're 2 different things. You have RASP, which puts you in the 75th Ranger Regiment, which is that is what is called a Ranger, right? They can go to Ranger School, which is just a leadership development course. So it's like in the big Army for Airborne, for example, like if I'm going to the 82nd Airborne, like that's an airborne unit, I need to be airborne. But someone from like 3rd ID or whatever can just go to airborne school, get airborne qualified, wear the badge, and then go back and never have to jump again. So you get your Ranger scroll. That means you're a Ranger. If you have the scroll, you are a Ranger. And there's this big debate whether, you know, some Rangers have tabs, which is from Ranger School, some Rangers don't. There's a big debate whether what a real Ranger is. I don't care. If you went through RASP, you literally have a certificate that says Ranger on it, right? But to be able to stay in the 75th Ranger Regiment and excel and get promoted and take leadership, you must attend Ranger School. So that's kind of like you graduate RASP, which honestly is, looking back on it, it's the easy part. Like, we used to have a saying in Ranger Regiment, which was, RASP is the easy part, staying in Ranger Battalion is the actual selection, right? Because every single day, you are doing what you did in RASP every day. Like, that's what you're doing. It's like, I realized that RASP was literally just the standards of regiment, right? Every PT test I took, it was just doing the standards that they do day to day in regiment. So how I was treated in RASP was how I was treated when I showed up to 2nd Ranger Battalion every day for 2 years. It's almost like a fraternity, right? So like, the way I imagined it was, if you have a scroll, you just graduated RASP, you are now a pledge for a fraternity, right? So the guys that are actually fraternity members have been through RASP and have been through Ranger School. So then you get a Ranger tab. So you'll see Ranger twice on their shoulder. They'll have the Ranger tab and they'll have the Ranger scroll. But all the guys without the Ranger tab, we consider them privates. So they are like, they're like the lower enlisted, essentially. And then you'll never, I mean, typically you'll never see those guys as team leaders. You'll never see them in leadership positions. They take up like the rifleman roles, the saw gunner roles. Ranger School is a story in itself. Yeah, so after I got my Tam Beret, I was assigned to 2nd Ranger Battalion, which is in Fort Lewis, Washington. So there's 3 Ranger Battalions. There's 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, but then they have like military intelligence ones now. You have 1st, which is in Savannah, Georgia. You have 2nd, which is in Fort Lewis, Washington, on the other side of the nation. And then you have 3rd, which is basically where we did all our RASP, which is, you're right there at Fort Benning. So I got stationed on the other side. I drove myself in my brand new V6 Mustang that I bought at 10.99 APR, and I drove that classic private move all the way to Fort Lewis, Washington. So when I checked in, that was like, I thought, you know, you feel really cool because you got the Tam Beret and you got these new uniforms. Because when I graduated, the 75th Ranger Regiment was authorized to wear multicam, and everybody else in the military had to wear ACUs. So it was like, when you were wearing your Tam Beret and your regular multicam uniform, you stuck out. You were like, who's that guy? Because he looks different from everybody. So it was super cool. I remember checking in at Fort Lewis, and there's like this little check-in place that you stay in before you actually get to your unit, and like, they treated us really awesome because they were like, oh, there's the Rangers, they're going, and we got to do whatever we wanted. And this was kind of like, hey, this is super cool. These dudes respect me and they have no idea who I am. Like, I could be a huge turd and they're still gonna respect me. But that was rudely interrupted the second I stepped onto the Ranger compound. That was like, yo, I went through 8 weeks of hell just to start right back where I was. Yeah, Ranger Regiment is a tough place. When you're brand new, they want to see what you're made of, right? Anybody can get in shape, you know? Anybody can run a 2 mile if they train for it. Like, anybody can do these things, but they want to see who you really are. So I remember right when I got there during Rear D, which is like, my company was deployed. Like, we're all in a room and they're like, you're going to Alpha Company, you're going to Bravo Company, you're going to Charlie. I went to Bravo Company, and they walked me in, and the first guy I saw was like this ginormous corporal, and he was like 6'4", just yoked out of his mind. And I just remember seeing him and I was like, holy crap, you know? If I was gonna see anybody, this is probably the least, like, this is not the guy I wanted to see. And then I remember they took us, every guy that was going to BCO, they took us in a room and they did, which is called a draft. And they literally go one guy at a time, and they just like, and they're not nice. They're not like, hey man, welcome to the unit. It's like, they look at you and they say something that's wrong with you. They're like, you need to gain weight. You're ugly. You're yeah. Like, it's not a positive experience. And they start just asking you really personal questions, or just stupid questions just to see your personality style. So one of the popular questions is like, if you could be any food, what would you be and why? It's just like stupid questions like that just to mess with you and get inside your head. And then finally they're like, we'll take this guy. He's going to 3rd platoon. He's going to 2nd platoon. This guy's going to 1st. I got assigned to 3rd platoon. And, you know, there's guys on Rear D that like were either injured or just got back from Ranger School, and you had no idea who these people were. And the most terrifying person in Ranger Regiment is the E4 that just gets back from Ranger School, because now they finally get to let out what has been done to them for the past couple of years on the next guys that had just came. So it was like every single day, I was called every single name in the book. It actually, when they found out I was a dancer, that was that was like a shit my pants moment, because I was the new guy twice. I was brand new when I showed up on Rear D, and then Rangers deploy for about 4 months. So when I got there, 3 months later, like 3.5 months later, they came back, and I was already there, you know, for a couple of months. So I learned the ropes, I learned how to interact, what not to do, you know, how not to piss people off. But now came the actual body back. Like the dudes who've been running the game, they finally come back. And then I remember it was Saturday, and I get a call, and I'm like in the barracks, and they're like, Fath, come in right now. They're like, the platoon's back and they want to meet you. And I'm like, so I remember I just throw on some, you know, I throw on my PTs, and I'm like, it's Saturday, please leave me alone. And then I walk into it, and there's like all the wives and kids are there, you know, because the families of the dudes are back. And I just walk in immediately, like basic training shark attack all over again. They like strip me down to my underwear, and I had like one tattoo at the time, and they're like, how many tattoos do you have? And I'm like, oh, just one. They're like, you're a fucking liar, take off your clothes. And I'm like, there's wives and kids right there. And they're like, I don't give a shit. And I'm like there in my underwear, and they're like inspecting me for all my tattoos. And then one guy was like, you know he's a dancer, right? And they're all like, oh, he's a dancer. This guy's a fucking dancer. They're like, dance for us right now. So I'm like literally sitting there, but I don't think they understood that I was actually like a good dancer. So they thought I was just gonna like do the kind of super bad little shuffle and like kind of do like a Napoleon Dynamite thing. But I was like doing break dancing. I did like a backflip. I did like all these power moves, and it kind of shut them up. They were just like, all right, all right. And then, yeah, and then from that moment on, it was just like every single day was torment. You know, when you go to work, if they tell you you have to be at work at 6 in the morning, we're there, all the privates are there at 5:30 with a broom and, you know, cleaning up the cage for the team leaders and all the tabs. If you have a Ranger tab, they call you a tab if you're not in a leadership position. So you're cleaning up the cage, making sure you're good. If you're not cleaning, you're reading your Ranger School handbook. You always have it on you. And it's like, you're always getting taught, you're always doing, there's no time that you're just sitting around doing nothing. And if you are sitting around doing nothing, they will screw you up. Like, you will get fucked up beyond your belief. Like, being a private is a rough life. Like, you're treated like absolute dog shit, like, all the time. You're given no responsibility because you're just assumed to be dumb. That's what kind of drives you to want to go to Ranger School. Because when you get your Ranger tab, it kind of all goes away. Typically, to go to Ranger School, like when I showed up, they wanted you to do a deployment and then a training cycle. So the way, like, the schedule for regiment on the year, or during the year, is you'll do 7 months of training cycle, you'll have 1 month of block leave, and then you'll do a 4-month deployment. So essentially, you only get 1 month of time off. And that's 2 weeks before you deploy, and then 2 weeks after you deploy. So basically, you do 7 months of training, you go home for 2 weeks, you deploy for 4 months, you go home for 2 weeks, and then you start the training cycle all over. And Ranger Regiment has historically been the only unit during the global war on terrorism to deploy consecutively every single year. So they're one of the most busy units in the Army. So essentially, I deployed to Korea, which was like not where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to, I wanted to go to Afghanistan. I wanted to go to, either BAF, Scorpion. There was Iraq was on the board too. Syria was starting to become a thing on our radar. But yeah, no, when I heard we're going to Korea, I was like, damn it. Like, what's going on in Korea? It's literally just going to be another training cycle in another place. So, but Korea was actually kind of fun. Like, I had a lot of fun in Korea. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but now looking back on it, I was like, I had so many great experiences in Korea. Like, just going out in Seoul. Seoul is such a cool city. It's been one of my favorite cities that I've been to so far, and I've been to a lot of cities. We spent 4 months in Korea in the dead of winter. I didn't realize it, can get into negative temperatures in Korea. And we went there because this was around 2015, right? Yeah, I went there in 2015 into 2016. And this was when North Korea was being a problem in the news and testing their munitions. So essentially, in Korea, they did this ginormous joint exercise called Full Eagle. and they was doing a show of force to North Korea, like, hey, if you push the button, this is what's gonna happen because we know you're watching. So we went down there. There was like SEALs down there. There was us down there. There was like a giant military exercise, and the entire time we were down there was like focused on that. I was still a private during it, so like they also introduced alcohol into like our training because there wasn't anything to do. Like the beer light was on all the time, and beer light is essentially like if you can or can't drink. It's an imaginary light. So if they say the beer light's on, it's like, okay, everybody can chill out and have a beer. And the beer light was constantly on during that deployment. And it was honestly terrible because, like, I am in a confined space with my leaders. I'm bottom of the barrel. Like, they get wasted and just abuse me. I remember one time I was like, we had like we were in the barracks and we stayed at this place called Warrior Base, which was about 1K away from the DMZ. It was super close. Like if I pulled up my Apple Maps, it was like, I could literally see the border of North Korea on my Apple Map phone. We were sitting there and like, when the team leaders would drink, they'd get super belligerent and like, I remember one time I was laying in my bed and like one of the E6s came over and my team leader, for some reason, assumed that we all stole his beers. And we're like, dude, we've been sleeping for like 2 hours. Like nobody stole your beers. Nobody took your cooler. Nobody. And he was just belligerently screaming at me, like while I'm in my bed. And then there was this other E6 that like had a beer and he was standing over me in my bed while I'm like, please leave me alone. And he's like, I'm going to spill this. He's like, I'm going to pour this beer all over you. I'm like, at that point, this is where you draw the line, right? There's a saying in the military, at least in the Army, which is when the beer flows, the rank goes. So like we're getting to the point where like I'm about to duke it out with my team leaders and the leadership here. But thankfully it never went to that scenario just because, as privates, most of them are young guys. I was 19 or 20 years old in Korea. Like I can't even legally drink. When we'd come in from Warrior Base, we'd stay at K-16, which was like an air base smack dab middle of Seoul. And that's when we like would go out for the weekends and have some fun time. But the thing about Korea is all American forces have a 12 o'clock curfew. Because there was an incident where, U.S. forces accidentally ran over a kid with a striker. And like ever since there, U.S. forces have been like on lockdown. You're able to stay out all night if you put in for pass, but we only got to do that one time. But when they let us out, we'd walk around the cities. We'd literally just get belligerently drunk off soju and like walk around and make a ruckus on the subways. There was one time where we were going like balls to the wall on training. We had like a team live fire, a platoon live fire, back to back to back. Literally just 3 weeks of just going nonstop. Just start at 9 o'clock in the morning, end at 3 in the morning, do it over again, like constantly. So we finally got back to K-16 and you could just tell everybody was just so ready to let loose. And then this was a couple days before the actual full legal exercise. And everybody's getting ready to leave. We're all putting our best clothes on and everything to hit the town. And then we get like congregated by our command. And he's like, the general of the U.S. forces here has put out a memo saying that no U.S. troops are allowed to engage in any drinking this weekend in preparation for full legal. And we all look at each other. We're like, yeah, sure. Whatever. Like, you're not going to tell a room full of Rangers that they can't drink. And I know I was looking at the leader too, and you could tell he was like, not really, but that's what we all assumed he said, So anyways, we all go out. People just go crazy, right? And the worst thing about that trip was when everyone would come back at like 12 because dudes were like puking and fighting and passing out. And I remember one of my private buddies, like, he was so wasted that he woke up in the middle of the night and like sleepwalked over to one of our team leaders and just started pissing all over him. And like he woke up and that team leader just kicked the shit out of him. So everybody went out. We came back. Our XO and one of the platoon leaders never made it back. And we're like, what the hell happened? So allegedly, they got super fucked up and my XO was a big guy. He was like 6'5", just like your typical Ranger officer, just really stoic and just noble. And like, he apparently got super belligerent drunk and just took on like 6 Korean cops and beat the crap out of them. Like straight up like out of a movie, like them on each arm and him just like throwing them off each, and they're just flying and they're like, ah! So he ends up getting arrested. He was relieved from command. It was like a whole thing. He was like arrested, relieved from command. We ended up leaving Korea because it was towards the end of the trip and he had to stay. He was like in Korean jail. And then to put the icing on the cake, he had to, I ended up running into him like a year or two later at the gym on base. Actually, it was about a couple months after we got back, and he's like entire leg was in a cast. And I was like, "Oh my God, sir, what happened to you? Are you okay? The last time I saw you, you were like, I didn't see you, you know?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm currently out processing the army. Like, I lost my command. Like, they're taking away my commission." And he's like, "And then when I was in Korea and I was facing all of the charges from the Korean, you know, police, he's like, I had to keep my jump pace, so I ended up tearing my entire ACL on a jump." And I'm like, dude, way to put the icing on the cake. That is just super rough luck. But now, you know, he's a country singer now and he's doing well. So, you know, so Korea, they have a red light district. I never personally went because that was like one of the ones that was like, if you go there and we catch you, it's over. So I was a good boy, you know. I'd go out and I'd go to the bars around it. It's called Hooker Hill. It's in Itaewon, right outside of a U.S. base, and essentially, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a kind of an incline that has a bunch of hookers. And I never went personally, but I know a couple guys ended up going, and like I said, they ended up getting caught in a big fight, and like it just never works out the way you think it's going to. You're gonna get caught. But yeah, they went, and like, you know, the stories of them, the guy who was in charge of them ended up getting, you know, taken out of his team leadership role, and he went to special forces selection and passed, and so he ended up getting like kicked out of regiment essentially. Yeah, dudes were going there, and I just never heard good things that happened. You know, my team leader always said, he's like, "Why are you gonna buy a hooker?" He's like, "You're always gonna pay for sex no matter what." He's like, "You're gonna have to take them out to dinner. You're gonna have to do all these things." The only thing is you're just getting rid of all the steps. And Korea in general, you know, I always tell people we lost a lot of good men in Korea. And they're always like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that." And I'm like, yeah, soju. It's the worst enemy there is. You know, dudes just do it to themselves. In Korea, another story was like, I got in trouble. I'm like, I almost got kicked out of regiment because when this was kind of like my private fuck up. This was like, oh, you know, oopsies, I'm young and I'm dumb. But in Korea, I ended up not even almost getting into Korea. Because when I flew in on Advon, which is the party that goes before the main body to kind of just prep things and get all the vehicles drawn and basically create the plan of how we're going to move these 100 guys to all these locations. So I went there, and I remember we stopped in Japan, and we did like a night in Japan. And since I was a private at the time, I had to stay back and watch while everybody, like all the tabs and everyone, went out into Tokyo and like had a nice time. I went to Chili's on base, and like I'm like, I'm in Japan, you know what I'm gonna eat? Authentic Japanese meal at Chili's. So I ended up going to Chili's, and some way on the way back, or somewhere on the way back, I lost my government travel card and I lost my military ID, and like it was terrifying because, you know, I'm a private, and these are like very important items, not just in general. Actually, in general, these are important items to just have on you, even when you're not deployed. So I ended up losing them somehow, and I like backtraced my steps, and I just could not find them. And then I remember some Asian guy who was staying at the hotel that we were like staying at was like, he came up to me and he's like, "I found this credit card on the ground," and it was my GTC. I was like, "Give me that right now!" And then but my ID was completely gone. So I almost didn't even get let into Korea. Like I had to get a memo from like command and like vouching that I was actually a U.S. service member and everything. And then finally, I had to go and get a new ID, and I get this new ID, and it's a big process finally. And then after getting to Korea, like 2 weeks after, we have our first kind of, hey, go out to Seoul, have a good time. On the way back, we took a taxi cab, and we're all belligerently drunk. I leave my wallet in the taxi cab and lose my ID for the second time in 2 weeks. Like, it was a big deal. I remember one of the mortar platoon sergeants or squad leaders, he still says every time he sees me or comments on all my stuff, he's like, "Don't lose your ID." And this was years ago, but me and him spent all day just walking, trying to figure out how to get a new ID, because I got the ID the first place because we in process and they had like an ID facility there. But this time it was like, now we have to figure out how to get an ID in a new place with no idea how the Korea system works here. So we like spent all day we probably walked like 10 miles all just on base because we didn't have a vehicle. We didn't have anything. And then we finally figured out that the way I get an ID is I need a memo from my CO, and we didn't have that. And we like went to the food court, and we were like super defeated sitting there at the food court, and we're like, what are we gonna do? We have to come back here. Like, we have to go back and get the memo. And out of nowhere, my CO walks into the building because he was there for like a meeting for like training, and me and him look at each other and we're all like, and we sprint up to him, we're like, sir, we're so happy to see you. And my commander's like, what the hell are you guys doing here? And we're like, we need a memo for you right now. And he's like, okay, let's go to the library and we'll print you up a memo. And then finally we got my ID after we spent like all day there walking around, putting like 10 miles down, just trying to get this ID, and then finally got it back. But that really prevented me from going to Ranger school, because I was supposed to go the second I got back, because like I was next in line. And after that, my team leader was like, kick rocks, dude. You do not deserve to go to Ranger school. You're going to be a private for longer now. So like after that, I was lucky though, because that was like grounds for RFS, which RFS in Ranger Regiment is released for standards. So it's pretty much, it goes back to that saying, it's harder to stay than it is to get there, because like dudes are getting RFS left and right. Whether you like, you continue need to put out the PT standards. You continuously need to perform physically. Like the standards are elevated at Ranger Regiment. Big Army has to do 60% on the PT test, like in each category. In Ranger Regiment, you have to do 80% minimum. And then there's no 2-mile run. It's only a 5-mile. So like you have to do 80%. So everything's elevated and you have to continue to do that. There's like, if you regress, you get kicked out, which is crazy, because if you got like a 79%, you'd be good in the regular Army, but in regiment, you're like a piece of shit. So you continually have to perform administratively. Like if you're not doing the training, because the training is really difficult, you can get RFS. If you get in trouble, DUIs are a huge killer of Rangers. Like you get RFS for that. So I was like looking at being RFS for losing my ID so many times, because this is like, that's a big fuck up. But I was good at my job. So that's what, that's what kind of kept me where I was. But finally, I ended up going to Ranger school when like 6 months, 7 months later. And then that was a beast of its own. In the Army in general, typically before you go to Ranger school, you go to like a pre-Ranger course. So the one that I went to was called CERT. It's Small Unit Ranger Tactics. It's ran by regiment. So essentially like the big Army, if they want to go to Ranger school, they go to something called like RTAC, which is their pre-Ranger. It's ran by like the big Army and TRADOC, but we go to a regiment-specific one, which is taught by actual Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment. So that was a kick in the balls. It's 3 weeks long, and like, when I got there, they restructured it and tried like a new system, and it was it was not fun at all. It was just like absolutely just Ranger school crammed in the 3 weeks just with PTing in it. Because in Ranger school, you don't PT. Like the entire school is a kick in the balls itself. But like when we're patrolling during the afternoon, in the morning, before then we did like a 5-mile run, or like we're working out. But that was 3 weeks long. In CERT, I remember just being so cold. It was one of the coldest I've ever been, because we were like practicing patrolling, and all night we stayed out there one time. And I just remember Ranger school was mainly just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing, trying to stay awake while shivering. And that was like my first exposure to it in CERT. So finally, I began CERT in November of 2016. And then I graduated Ranger school March of 2017. So all in all, I was there for 5 months. But after I graduated CERT, you go into Ranger school, and then immediately when you start Ranger school, it's like you're going. And the Ranger school is split into 3 phases. You have Darby phase, which is there at Fort Benning, and then you have Mountain phase, which is in Dahlonega, Georgia, and then you have Florida phase, which is at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. You know, each phase has their own challenges, and I remember the first week is called Rap Week, and that's where you're doing all like your physical standards. So that's where you do like your Ranger physical fitness test, which is like push-ups, sit-ups, 5-mile runs, 6 pull-ups, and then you're doing like all your graded tests. You do your 12-mile ruck march there. You do like Ranger stakes. You do like your water survival thing, which was actually super miserable because it was literally dead of winter when I was there. And I just had this weird, like, every military school I ever went to was in the winter. So, like, I prefer the winter because the summer, I don't do well in the heat. I got heat stroke in basic training during the summer. So I was like, if I can stay cold, I'll stay cold. The first week was absolute kicking the balls. And, like, Ranger school is 100% a marathon. Like, they reward you for doing really well on physical events. But honestly, in the long run, it ends up kicking you in the balls because, like, if I ended up getting if I ran like a 32-minute 5-mile, which is pretty quick, And the next day I have to do and then I did like a, a 2:15, 12-mile ruck. I just expended all my energy for the rest of the stuff. So like my 5 mile, I ended up getting like a 38 or a 39, just like right under. And then if you just pass the standards, because this is literally a marathon, I'm like saving my energy. And I was glad because I saw guys that like would get major pluses, which is the reward, and it literally does nothing for you. It's just an invisible like pat on the back, and they're like, "Here's a major plus," and the only thing that the major pluses or major minuses do at the end is determine whether you get honor graduate, and that's like one person. And I could give a flying fadoodle whether I made honor grad or not. I just wanted to pass the school and go back to my unit so I can start being treated like a man, Rap week is at a different location, and then once you finish that, they drive you to Camp Darby, which is where you do all your patrolling out of. And Ranger School is typically that. It's you patrol. You go out, they give you missions, you patrol there, you execute either raids or recons on them, and then every person in the platoon is like put in different roles in leadership, and that's how you're graded. And it just sucks because you're carrying a super heavy ruck. It's like an 80-pound ruck because you have all your sustainment gear. You're out there for days on end, and each phase it increases. I think it's like in Darby phase, you're out for 3 days, you come back, refit, you're out for 3 days. In Mountain phase, you're out for like 5 days or 4 days, you come back, refit. And I just remember Florida phase, you're out there for 10 days straight. So you're carrying 10 days worth of stuff on your back, and it's just absolutely miserable. And and I remember I recycled Darby phase because of patrols. They have a saying in Ranger School where it's, you don't get your Ranger tab, your buddy gets it for you. Because literally everybody is held accountable for any mistakes. So if I'm doing really well as like the leader, but say one of my guys over here like falls asleep and gets lost, I get failed because of his actions. So it's like it's all up to me to pretty much make sure everybody's doing the right thing at all times. And I remember I ended up getting recycled because I failed patrols because of, it was just so frustrating trying to corral people, especially it's the hardest thing when they're tired and they're super hungry. Like people don't typically operate at their best. So if you can make people do what you want them to do when they're tired and hungry, that's kind of the leadership lesson that comes out of Ranger School. Because that, to me, was like, oh, this is a leadership course. Well, it makes sense. If you can make somebody do something when they're tired and hungry, you're in a pretty good spot there. So I remember specifically, we had this brand new guy in the Army who was in my platoon, and I will never forget his name, and I'll save it because I don't want him to get beat up on the street. But I remember you, buddy, and like he was fresh out of 10th Mountain Division in New York, like literally joined the Army. His first week there, they're like, we're having Ranger School tryouts. He did it because obviously fresh out of basic training, he's like used to doing all the crap. And he gets there, so he has no experience. He has like no nothing, and or discipline in general. And I just remember one time I was assigned area reconnaissance, which is essentially you have an objective and you just need to look at it and like move around it and just monitor what's happening. And if you are assigned Bravo team leader in that mission, it's almost a guaranteed go. Because while the Alpha team leader is out doing the actual recon and like looking at and moving all its positions, the Bravo team leader stays back. And all he has to do is make sure the patrol base is set up, which is literally, I draw a triangle and I take some measurements or some directions with my compass and draw it on a map, and that's it. And it's like a guaranteed go. So I heard my roster number get called, and they're like, air reconnaissance, Fath, Bravo team leader, and inside I'm like screaming. I'm like, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, man. This is awesome. And I just remember I had one guy with me who the night previously ended up sleeping on an ant pile, and he started to go into anaphylaxis. Like he was all messed up. Like he could barely think straight. Like he'd stand and just immediately fall on the ground. And they're like, he was supposed to go out on the area reconnaissance because he was in like the slotted role. So we switched him out. So he was staying back with me. So now I had to try to keep this guy awake because you can't sleep. That would get me failed. So I'm trying to keep this guy awake. So this dude is laying on the ground. I have like 5 guys with me. I have my RTO, and then I have 3 people pulling security. So they're all at like the apexes of the patrol base, because the patrol base is a triangle typically. And I'm in the middle with the RTO. And like I have another guy, I have anaphylaxis Ant-Man over here, and then I have this new private who's like up against the log. And my anaphylaxis guy, there's no stopping him. He pulls out his whoopee, which is like the greatest thing that is invented in the military. It's just a blanket that every service member probably steals and has at home. And he wraps himself in it and just goes to sleep. And I'm like, I'm shaking him and he's not waking up. And I'm like, oh, this is so shitty. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to try to, I'll take a knee next to him and pull his sector, and I'll use that and be like, he's medically, he's like incapacitated right now. So I just hear some dude like shuffling behind me, and I'm like doing my checks, and I see this new guy pull out his whoopee and start wrapping himself, and I'm like, dude, what are you fucking doing? And he's like, oh, well, that guy's doing it, so like I figured, I could do it, I'm pretty tired. And I'm like, put your whoopee back in your, I was like, put your whoopee back in your backpack and pull security. I gotta pull out these claymores. I'm like, I'm not playing with you. I'm like, he's fucked up. Don't listen to him. Don't do what he does. You're your own man. And then, so anyways, I like yell at him, and I go out and I place my claymores out, and I'm like dog legging them around the trees and stuff. And I come back, and my RTO like sprints up to me, and he's like, the Ranger instructor's in the patrol base. And I'm like, what? I'm like, we're not done. I'm like, I'm not done charting. And then I like see this red lens flashlight kind of looking at the ground, which it looks like a boulder, like it looks like the RI, the Ranger instructor, is like shining a light at a rock on the ground. And like I start getting closer and closer and closer, and I realize it's not a rock. It's that fucking new guy who took out his whoopee again and is like bundled up in it, and his weapon is like, everything's tied to you in Ranger school, so like you're just like this farm of 550 cord coming off, and his 550 is like completely extended, and his weapon is like way over here. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, no. And I just see the RI like take out an arty sim, which is those explosives, and just like drop it right next to him, and it just blows up, and the entire guy like is screaming, waking up, and he's like, ah! And then the RI comes up to me, he's like, that dude just got you failed. And I was like, oh, and then I lost it. I'm like screaming, I'm in this guy's face, I'm like, fuck you, motherfucker! Yeah, so that got me recycled in Derby. The guy with the ants, he was his own world, so that was the new guy. And like, yeah, so he was like, that guy got you failed. And the ironic part was the RI was from 2nd Ranger Battalion. So like we have this like unspoken kind of bond where he's like, okay, usually they would help you out, but that was just such a bad thing that it got me screwed. So when you recycle Ranger school, it's not fun. It's like, you think you'd get your phone, like you don't have your phone or anything in Ranger school, you're bald, you have to shave your head. When you recycle, you think they'd like give you your belongings back and whatnot, because it's about 2 weeks before you class up again. It's not. You're literally a prisoner. So like I remember I recycled, they don't give you your phone. There's one pay phone in the like outside of the recycle barracks, and there's about 50 of us, so we all have to take turns. There's like one room with library books, and then when we're not in there or they give us access to it, you're literally doing area beautification, you're pulling weeds, you're pushing a lawnmower. It's literally jail, and it's the worst place ever. I remember there used to be one Ranger instructor that would make so much money. It was such a solid business plan. Every Sunday when he would work, he'd come in and he'd bring Little Caesars $5 large pizzas. And Ranger school students are all starving. We're super tired, and we're all starving because they don't feed you. And he would sling them to us. So it'd be like, he'd double the price. So it'd be like $10 for one pizza, 20 for two. And I remember every time he'd come, it'd be like Christmas for me, because I'd grab 2 large pizzas and eat them in the barracks, and it was the greatest thing ever. But I remember I ate so much one time when I recycled Ranger school. I was the only person with my expert infantry badge, which is like this entire, it's super stupid. It's like, oh, congratulations, you know how to do your job. Okay, so like, here's a badge. But they do it every year in the infantry, and it's like, there's lanes, and you have to do graded tasks and all this stuff. But I was the only one with it in my Ranger school class. And the Ranger Training Brigade, pretty much the people that were running Ranger school, like they have their own unit there, and they were going through their expert infantry badge, like tryouts. So here I am, a bald Ranger school student, grading them on how to do it. So I was like running the bounding movement lane, where they had to like low crawl and 3 to 5 second rush and like basically avoid enemy fire. And I'm just over there like operating this pneumatic gun that pretty much mimicked the sound of gunfire. So it would tell them whether they needed like low crawl or high crawl or 3 to 5 second rush. But the guy that took me out there, he's like, we're gonna stop by Arby's when we're done. And I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, yeah. I was such a fat boy in Ranger school. You're either a hungry Ranger or you're a tired Ranger, and I was both, but mainly hungry. So we like stopped by Arby's, and I remember I spent like $50 at Arby's just like buying everything. I bought like 3 sandwich melts. I bought like a gyro or a gyro for the Greek people, and I had like a bunch of fries and a milkshake, and just got so fat boy fat. And when he dropped me off, it was about chow time. So when you recycle, you can still use the cafeteria or the DVAC, and no Ranger School student is going to say no to food. So I had to be like, he's like, it's chow time, go to the DFAC. And I didn't want them to know that I just got like totally fat boy fat from Arby's. So I was like, okay, I'll go. And so I went to the DFAC and like ate everything. And I just remember being so full of food that when I went back to the barracks, I like literally started just projectile vomiting in the toilet. But I had the biggest smile on my face because it was so worth it. You're eating like the tiniest bit of food in Ranger School. When they give you your food, you have about the amount of time it takes to sit down. You have about like 2 to 3 minutes to eat an entire meal, and then you're gone. So like when you get your food and you're like in the little conveyor belt, like kind of shuffle thing, dudes are like already smacking their faces trying to get all the food down. Because the second you sit down, if all the seats are full and dudes are coming to sit down, the RIs will just start pulling you up. So it's like you come, you sit down. If there's no chairs available, someone's got to get up, and whoever was there first is getting up. So yeah, food is a big thing in Ranger School, and like dudes are sneaking it all the time. I remember when I was in Florida phase, I passed Darby on my second go around. I went through, did mountain phase, worst phase ever. I'll tell you, you're just literally, your rucksack is heavier, it's colder because you're in the mountains, and you're literally just getting rained on, and it's the worst terrain ever. I didn't know there was mountains in Georgia until I went to Dahlonega, and I'm like, holy crap, these are some mountains. And that was the one phase I told myself, like, I was like, if I recycle this phase, it's over. I'm like, I'm leaving. This place sucks. I'm not doing this again. That was the worst place. Thankfully, passed by the skin of my teeth. But I went to Florida phase after that, and then I remember in Florida phase, that's when I was like starting to do I was like, I'm over this school. I've been here like 4 months. I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. I met this guy. He was from 1st Ranger Battalion. And before we went out on our field exercise training, which was like 10 days straight, we came up with this plot to raid the vending machines that were inside of the barracks where they kept all the Op 4 for the Ranger School, which is essentially the actual guys at the unit that would play the bad guys for Ranger School. So they lived right next to our barracks, and they had a packed vending machine with like honey buns and all these fat boy snacks, and we knew it was there, but no one had the balls to go there. So I remember we were sitting there and we were plotting, and the unit had a night jump. So everybody was pretty much gone doing this night jump, so no one was there in the barracks. So me and my buddy, it was like 11 o'clock at night, and we like sneak out of the barracks and like run over to the vending machine. And I remember I grabbed my like credit card out of my little duffel bag, because you keep all your belongings with you as you progress through Ranger School. And I like grabbed my debit card, and I went to the vending machine, and he was just like putting all the numbers in, and I just remember just like swiping, and it was like a whole system that we invented. And then as we're like raiding this vending machine, we hear the door just like swing open, and we like little girls, we like screamed, and we ran into this laundry room that was right next to it, and we're like huddled in the corner, like grabbing each other, trying to like be as small as possible. And we just hear these 3 guys coming in, and their voices are getting louder and louder and louder, and we're looking at each other, and we're like, this is it, man. months of training. It's just we're about to be kicked out. We're gonna get to our unit. We're gonna get kicked out of Ranger Regiment. We're gonna have to go to the big army. We're gonna be doing EIB with these guys in like a couple months. And thankfully, they were just 3 drunk dudes, 3 drunk Op 4 like regular guys walked in just stumbling, and they walked right past us, and we're like. And then we went right back to the vending machine and started swiping it again. And we like raided the entire thing. And I just remember running back to like the student barracks with like a handful of cake, or like these little baggy cakes. And I went up on I went to the bathroom, because the original plan was to grab all this stuff, put it in our rucksacks, and bring it to the field with us so we have extra food. But I just had no willpower because I was so hungry. And I just remember going into the bathroom with like 5 packages of these like honey bun things. and I like put my feet up on the toilet so like nobody would see my legs. And I just remember sitting there and like eating these cakes and like literally tears are running down my face because I'm so happy. I was like, dude, that was such an emotional experience. Oh, graduating Ranger School was just like it was more of a feeling of relief just because you go through it's a challenging school. It's one of the it was way in my opinion it was way harder than RASP because RASP was 8 weeks and like you got time off. In Ranger School, it's you're there once you get there, it's like that's it. And you know, you're tired, you're hungry. It's such a challenging school, and it was more like it wasn't like I'm proud I graduated this school. I was like I'm proud that I'm over the like I don't have to come back here. But it was nice because my last mission, like how I graduated Ranger School, was like one of the nicest things was ever told to me, and it was like all the planets aligned on that mission, and it was just perfect. I remember I got assigned as one of the squad leaders on like day 10, like the last day of the FTX. And typically, if your name is called twice, it means you failed the first patrol, and they're giving you like a redemption. So this was like the last day. My name was called again, and nobody ever wants to hear your name be called the second time because that means you failed. So I'm like, oh, this is like my last chance. I do not want to recycle again. And I remember we were walking down this road and they planned this L-shaped ambush on us. And like we got absolutely massacred and we took like 60 to 70% casualties and like the RIs stopped it and they had the commanding officer of the company that we were in Alpha Company, like walking us as well. And like he stopped us and he brought all the squad leaders in and he's like, who knows what the definition of a battle drill is? And like the three other squad leaders are like officers and they look at each other and they don't know. And like one guy tries to answer, but it's not correct. And then he looks at me, he's like, do you know? And I'm like, a collective action rapidly executed without the application of a delivered decision-making process, sir. And he's like, what the hell? And in Ranger Regiment, that's like tattooed on your forehead. Like your team leaders will drill you on the definitions and everything all day. So that was like stuck in my head. And he's like, what the hell? Are you from Ranger Regiment? And I was like, yes, sir. And he's like, who's your commanding officer? And I'm like, it was Captain Michelson, sir. And he's like, oh, Michelson? Me and him were PLs together at 175. I'm walking you now. And I'm like, oh. So anyways, he like puts our patrol back together and then we start taking off and we're going to our ORP, which objective rally point, which is like before the mission. And then I'm like looking at the map and we're doing a map check and we're stopped and I'm making sure all my guys are pulling security. And he like comes up to me, he's like, where are we at on the map? And I'm like, right here. And I give him like a 6-inch grid, boom, spot on. It's like within 50 meters. And he's like, wow, that was a great one. And I didn't even use a protractor, I like eyeballed it. And he's like, great, you're doing fantastic. And then he like leaves me alone. And then the mission actually comes in and we're doing like the recce on the mission. And I realize we are right next to our barracks. Like you're patrolling out around the area and you go pretty far out. But I guess like the way they planned all the missions is where the final one is like right next to where we have to go back. And in the training FTX, before you actually leave the Ranger School compound, was on this exact same building that we're about to hit. So I know where all the entrances is. I know how it's laid out. I know because we've done this before. And I'm like, there's another planet just like coming to a line. And we do the hit and it's perfect and it's super violent. We do everything we need to. We're out in there. And then all of a sudden before we actually do like our red, white, and blue plan, which is essentially like how you extract off the objective, this storm comes out of nowhere. And it's like not just some rain. It's like hurricane, lightning, and the RIs like come running over and they're like, fuck the red, white, and blue plan. He's like, get 100% of men, weapon, and equipment and just run back to the barracks. Run as fast as you can. And like literally everybody's like, and you just see this like line of Ranger School students just with like super dirty, just like running as fast as they can to the barracks, which is like a half-mile away. And like this, I shit you not, the second I step foot through the barracks door, absolute hail, like piss, like just ends up hitting and it misses me by like this much. And it's like thundering outside and I'm like, ooh, oh my God. And then that was it. That was like the end of the FTX. And I was like, Jesus Christ, it was like blacked out. I was like, what just happened? And then afterwards, the RIs come and typically after you do the mission complete, they like debrief the guys. And the CO like comes in, he's like, roster number, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, right here, sir. And he's like, come outside. And then he's like talking to me. And then he goes, whenever I think of what a Ranger is, you are it. And I was just like, just like started crying. And I'm like, thank you, sir. And he's like, yeah, he's like, let me take a picture of you. I'm gonna send it to old Michelson. And he's like, he has good guys. He's got really good guys. And I'm like, oh, thank you, sir. And he's like, all right, enjoy your way home. And then I just remember bawling because I was like, oh, I'm just so thankful to be done with this. You know, it took so much out of me. Ranger School, you know, I have so much respect for not only the guys, you know, in Ranger Regiment that have their tab, but anybody who has a Ranger tab. Like, if I see one, I like immediately go up and shake their hand because I know that is just the worst place. Yeah, so after Ranger School, I came back and I immediately took a gun team. I was a machine gun team leader and then deployed. I did a training cycle and then deployed to Syria. So I still had like 2 years left after I got out of Ranger School. So after that, I went to Syria. I went there in 2017. That was the Wild West. That was my first combat deployment ever. And my first and only. It was, you know, I wanted to do my job so bad, but it just ended up being, you know, you don't get to pick and choose your battles. You just go wherever they send you. So that was my first exposure to actual combat deployment. And, you know, it wasn't typically what I expected. Classic Ranger deployment, you go to Afghanistan and you're just main task force and you're just kicking in doors and running ops, right? That's all the stories that I've heard from like my leaderships. You know, that's what they did. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. It just didn't end up like that. So we went to Syria and the environment was so different from Afghanistan. Like it was a proxy war almost because you had all these cells. Like I don't even know what was going on. If you've seen the movie Civil War, you're like watching the movie and you're like, I don't like this movie because I don't understand what's happening. And I'm like, that was exactly my war experience. Like some people, like I talk to people that go to Afghanistan and they're like using all this lingo and they're like, yeah, you know, obviously we're fighting Taliban forces in Afghanistan. And I'm like, in Syria, we were fighting like 5 different people. It was us versus ISIS, ISIS versus everyone. You know, Assad, there was SDF out there was Russians out there. It was like 5 different wars happening all at once. And I was just, you know, we were in a task, almost like an advisory task role, where it's like we're not supposed to be running ops because we're advising like the SDF, which is the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are kind of the U.S. aligned side forces that are Kurdish ran in Syria. So like I've heard stories about like Bagram Airfield, how we have like these amazing barracks and the gyms are state of the art, and you know can get mid-rats at night where you're eating and you're running missions at night and you're sleeping during the day. Syria is complete opposite. It was like we were here in a support role, and it was like us, Delta Force, British SAS, Special Forces, like all these big players under one roof. And it wasn't even a barracks. It was an abandoned schoolhouse that we took from ISIS, and it was 3 levels high, and we just all lived underneath it. And there was like no running water. We had to shit in bags for like months, and there was no food. We had to eat MREs the first 2 months before they like contracted a chef to come out. And then everybody got dysentery because they kept washing all the pots and pans with like this creek river water, and like it was just a nightmare. But the cool thing was like I didn't get to, you know, do the whole running and gunning, like kicking in doors that I've heard so much about. But the cool thing that I got out of it was I got a lot of medical experience, something I never expected myself to be doing. Because, you know, the most training that I got in medical was like TCCC, which is Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and then RFR, which is Ranger First Responder, which is just a little bit more beefed up TCCC. And I remember we're like staying in this schoolhouse and we had a CCP, which is a casualty collection point, a stone throw away on the same compound. And when we got there, we were the closest medical facility to the FLOT, which is the forward line of trace. It's basically when you hear behind enemy lines, that is the line. So anytime the SCF would go in and clear and get absolute, you know, shot, blown up, whatever by ISIS, they'd bring them to us. And just, you know, it was just a room. It was just a building with a couple of rooms in it, and 2 rooms had like 2 stretchers and then just medical equipment. And our role was like, we had to be security for it, so nobody was allowed in there with a gun. And then we would have to pat down all the casualties to make sure they weren't bringing in bombs or anything. But on top of the role, they needed hands. They were like, we don't have enough people. Do you want to help? So I'd be like, yeah, I want to help. This is sick. So, here I am packing gunshot wounds and, watching them amputate legs and doing heart massages. And they're like, you want to do this? And I'm like, yeah. Meanwhile, there's a real person just blowing the smithereens in front of me. And I'm like putting my fingers in them and, taking doing stuff with tourniquets and packing gauze. I remember there was one story where I didn't realize that so much poop involved. There's so much human feces involved in like the medical field. And I didn't realize this because I remember one time we had this guy come in and he was like gunshot wounds all over him and he was blown to smithereens. And one of the surgeons there, his name was Alex, and he was a geeky guy. He was a white guy with like a Jufro, and he got glasses on, and he'd wear like a tan tee, PT shorts, and then cowboy boots, and he was super skinny, just a super nerdy guy. And I remember he came in like a little bit later in the trip just to beef up the OR team, and yeah, we're like working on this guy, and he's got these. The casualty has like these or quarter-sized just holes in his ass. And I'm like sitting there and I'm just packing gauze into this guy's butt cheek. And I remember I'm like, oh, I put 2 rolls of gauze. You can fit a lot in an ass cheek. And I'm sitting there and my fingers are in this guy's butt cheek and it's already a little embarrassing, And then Alex comes out of nowhere and it comes like right next to me and just shoves his finger in the guy's asshole. And like one thing you could do is you can check for renal swelling or anal swelling. I'm sorry, renal's kidney, but you can check for anal swelling and that's a good sign of like internal bleeding if he's, that finger's getting a nice little grab. So he's like sitting there and he's like reaching into this guy's asshole and I'm like right next to him packing this guy's butt. And all of a sudden he like rips his finger out and just shit goes all over my face. Just like, he just goes, like looks at it and it goes, and I'm like, get your fucking finger out of my face. I start just freaking out. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And he's like, sorry, man, sorry. So now I'm like in the corner, like trying to wipe off this Syrian guy's shit off my face. And then I'm like, dude, there's so much poop involved. But pretty much every day we were getting casualties. So that was such a cool experience to just, wake up in the morning, have a cup of coffee and just go into the OR and just get to treat people. Not what I expected. But in the moment, I wanted to kick indoors. I wanted to like shoot my gun. That trip, I didn't even fire my gun once. We got to shoot at the range and everything, but it wasn't what I expected at all. We had some close calls where like when we showed up and first Ranger Battalion was there and we were doing like a handoff. And I remember I was advon there too. So I was there a little earlier than the main body came. And I remember we were like sitting there and they're teaching us where all their like defensive positions were and all that. And all of a sudden an RPG just like literally gets shot over us and just like airbursts on top of us. And everyone's like, what the fuck? And like everybody's like running to the positions. And I'm like, I just got there. It's been like day 1 or 2. And I'm like, this is going to be a sick deployment. And then like everybody's there and then it just dies down, like nothing happens. And I see like this SDF guy, which is on our team, like comes over in this truck and he's got like an expended RPG and he like lifts it above his head and he's like, sorry. he accidentally discharged this RPG over everybody's head. And I'm like, oh, this is a different world over here. And then there was another time where we just cleared Raqqa. Like when we showed up, it was probably 90% contained and like cleared out. By about like 2.5 months in, 3 months in, because I was there for like 3.5 months. We left a little early, but it was 100% cleared by SDF. And like when that day came, it was like a giant party. Like they were rallying in the streets, like everybody was dancing and everything. But I remember one time I was like sitting in our ready room or like our barracks room, and a wave of gunfire just starts coming. And like the amount of gunfire that you hear in like Black Hawk Down, like movies that are like etched in my mind. And everybody just starts running up to their defensive positions. And I remember the first thing I see is a 50 cal with slap rounds on them. And it has a giant EOTech. So this is like the most murdered out 50 cal you've ever seen. And I immediately go for the 50 cal. And slap rounds are essentially a type of 50 cal round that are really good at putting big holes in heavy armor. So like they literally almost blow up on impact. So I'm sitting there and I'm like surveying, and I'm swinging, I'm like free gunning it right now. And there's this MSR, which is a main supply route that's like goes into Raqqa, and that's kind of, we had really good fields of fire on our defensive positions. And I just see like, it's probably like 6 or 7 trucks just packed with guys in the back, like with all guns, and you can see them like waving, and they're about like 1,000 meters away from us. And like dudes are like on glass, like watching them, and they're all firing their guns, and that's where it's coming from. And we're like, oh my God, this is it. This is like gonna be a last stand battle to, you know, write books and movies. And if we were SEALs, we'd have movie deals and books after this came out. But we were all ready. I like racked the thing and like my safety's off and my fingers are like sweating and just ready to just get it on. And I'm sitting there, my heart's pounding. And then like right as they're getting super close, like one of the SDF guys comes in with the radio. He's like, "That's us." He's like, "That's our guys. They're just celebrating." And I was like, dude, you are literally gonna get everybody murdered out here just because you guys think it's super cool to like do a cyclic rate of fire without letting anybody know. Yeah, they were super funny. They used to check their guns, like, you know, in the military, U.S. military, we like clean our guns, and we didn't really shoot them. We just make sure their work, the way they, or just make sure they're clean and, you know, they're taken care of. But the way they would check their guns, like they'd randomly just take the safety off and like shoot rounds in the ground and be like, "Oh, it's still shooting, it's good." So like you'd just be sitting there and you just hear like, and you're like, "Oh man, oh, that's just Bashir over there, you know, testing his AK, making sure it's still working." I got to shoot a bunch of 120 mortars. Like that's all we did. I did like 4 things in Syria. I would work out and eat, and then I would go to the CCP and work on people, and then I would go shoot mortars out of the 120, which was a crazy experience. Like that will make you mentally retarded afterwards just from that overpressure. Like I don't know how our mortars did it, because we'd shoot 300, like hundreds of rounds of 120 a day. And that was kind of hard for me because it was exciting, because that was like the most combat that I got. The combat, like they gave me my combat action badge afterwards, and that's how, like, if you see a CIB and an Army guy, you're like, that guy's been in it. But I got mine from shooting mortars. And it's like, it was cool because when I first did it, yeah, we had a fire mission, and it was like a 10-round, 8-round fire mission, and it was just like shoot mortars. And mortars are so emotionless, and because imagine if someone came up to you with a button, and they're like, "Hey, if you push this button, someone in the world will die." And I just took the button, and I was like, smash, 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 you know? So like we got the fire mission, I'm sitting there hanging rounds in this 120, like it's boom, it blows up, and then the round's gone, and you never see it again. And that's it. And like that is going somewhere. And the thing about the 120, the kill radius is around 30 meters. So 30 meters of whatever it lands is pretty much going to be eradicated. And that's 6 times more than a frag grenade, just to put that in perspective. So I'm like shooting it, and there's an SF guy, special forces guy, like in the back of a Humvee, and they got like live feed of where it's landing, and it's BDA, battle damage assessment. And he's like, "Oh, dude," he's like, "You just took out like this giant building." He's like, "There was definitely dudes in there. Good job, nice." And I'm pumped up, right? I'm like, "Oh, I just got my first kills, man. This is it. This is why I came here." And I'm like super excited. And I walk back in our like living quarters, and my squad leader and all my other team leaders are there because I'm a machine gun team leader. And I walk in, I'm like, "Guess who just fucking murdered some people? Yeah, yeah." And my squad leader looks at me, and he goes, "It doesn't fucking count unless you get to play with the dead body. So shut the fuck up." And I'm like, "Dude, why do you gotta ruin everything?" You know? This was my moment. You know, this was my moment. This is finally, I got to do everything that I enlisted with. I finally got to murder people legally, you know? And he just took it away from me. And that was like one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because that was my only time to do any of that. That was my one combat deployment. So it took years of therapy to get over that. You know, we wrapped up the trip. Raqqa was secured. There was no more really threat there, at least when we were there. So, you know, we packed up early. It was like 3 weeks early, almost a month early. Instead of doing 4 months, we did 3, and we came home. So after I came home, I took a fire team, and that's like a big honor. You know, being a Ranger Regiment, the best job is fire team leader, 100%. You have a lot of responsibility, but you're still in that role where you were the first man in, right? You're doing the door kicking. Like then you go to squad leader and you start to stay back a little bit and control the pieces. Then platoon sergeant, now you're behind the squad leaders watching it all happen. So like the fire team leader is the best job in the Army. In the infantry, the team leader is. So I finally got to do that. I did one training cycle. We had an Afghanistan deployment coming up. I was like, this is what I want to do. Literally, like a month before we were supposed to leave, they gave it to another company. And then at that point, I was like, my ETS was coming up, and I'm like if I re-enlist for another 3 years, there's a possibility of deploying 1 or 2 times in 3 years. And I'm like, that's a commitment to me, you know, and that's a big if. So I decided at that point, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to get out. I'm like, I'm going to go out, you know, try something new. I'm going to go try to get my degree and my education. And that's pretty much what I did. But I worked until I got out. I remember I ran an FMP, which is a full mission profile, which is like a training raid. And then 2 days later, I was loading up my U-Haul and then driving off. So I like worked until the day that I got out. And they, you know, rewarded me for doing that because I made sergeant as I was getting out, which is like, you don't give people promotions that are getting out, you know? That was a nice kind of send away thing. So then I still love the military, and I wanted to keep my connections to it. So I ended up going to the California National Guard just because in the back of my mind, I was like, if shit pops off or if I ever want to go back, I can easily transition because I'm still in the military. I just have to go active from reserve. So I did that. I ended up getting put in a reconnaissance and a sniper section. And then I mainly did my time in the reconnaissance side. So I was like a reconnaissance team leader, which is about equivalent to like a squad leader on the infantry line. Because the compositions are completely different from recon to like fire team or to squad on the infantry. So I had to like relearn an entire new job. I thought regiment would like give me the tools to be successful in recon, and it did. It gave me like baseline infantry and made me really good at the basics. But recon was like complete opposite. So that was really fun. When I went to the National Guard, I was going to community college, and I knew I wanted to go into business. I ended up getting activated for the BLM riots, like when George Floyd incident happened, and like everybody was rioting. I ended up getting activated in the National Guard, and I had to do like 10 days in downtown LA, just like on the streets for doing like 12 hours on, 12 hours off, just constantly, just like making sure people weren't burning down buildings. And that was an experience in itself. I got the call to get activated, and like I think I was drinking beers with like my fiance's friends because it was her birthday, so I had to like wait until I sobered up and then went in. So I got there like 7 hours after the call, which is okay because like I was the last one. But we ended up getting shipped into downtown with like full combat gear and everything. It was just nobody knew what to bring. Like dudes didn't bring assault packs; they just brought bullets, plate carriers, and helmets and their guns. That's it. And like we get dropped off there and nobody knows what the situation is. We stage out of the Staples Center in downtown LA. Then we're basically there on standby waiting for somebody to tell us like what the hell is going on. Cause like I think we definitely missed the big events, like where they were literally having like shops on fire and like raiding and pillaging stuff. That was like the trigger to activate the National Guard. So when we got there, we kind of like pushed it all out, and it started to mellow a lot, but there were still like onesies and twosies, like frenzies. And, you know, I remember one day we were activated, and like they put my section as like show of force, because in the recon section in the Guard, you need to try out to be there. So like these are all like the studs of the National Guard that don't go to the Special Forces side. So like, in my opinion, it's like you have regular infantry in the National Guard, then you have like recon guys that are on top, and then you have the guys that go to like Special Forces in the National Guard. So like we're right there, we're a little cut of above, and I'm sorry if that makes you angry, but it's true. So they put us on like the steps of City Hall, and on this day was one of the largest like protest rallies they've ever had. There was thousands of people there just literally screaming "fuck you" at me. It's not a good feeling, you know. So we're sitting there, and I'm like, dude, it was such a tense time. And like, you know, there was a lot of mixed emotions. You know, you have an event that, not only a event, I feel like that's downplaying it. You have a drastic event that causes such an emotional response, right? So like, regardless of how you feel about it, it's kind of hard to navigate. So like, well, first of all, from a leadership perspective, you have guys that, you know, don't have real world experience in the National Guard, right? We train, but like not often, and we never train this. So you have that response. Our rules of engagement that we were given were more relaxed in Los Angeles than I had overseas in Syria. You know, they're like, if you feel threatened, you may fire and engage. And I'm like, you're telling dudes that work at Verizon Wireless full time to, like, you know, if they feel threatened by somebody, they're allowed to shoot. That's a problem I have to navigate. And then nobody has anything, you know, sustainment wise. We were out there for 10 days. So like guys are calling their wives and girlfriends to like bring them stuff. And like nobody really knows what the situation is because it's constantly developing. After I got out of active duty and I started like my like civilian transition, right? It's been years. It's been I did 4.5 years. So it's been 4.5 years of my adult life. Ever since I was 16 years old, I've dedicated my like entire life to the military. It's become my identity now. So when I transitioned, it was super difficult. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people, you know, that were in my shoes getting out of the military that, you know, can relate to that. You're told ever since you joined that you're like the best, right? They're like infantry, whether I was going through basic training, they're like infantrymen are the best. And then going through airborne, they're like paratroopers, we're the best. And then we go to the Ranger Regiment, we're like Ranger Regiment, we are the best. And I'm like, yeah, we are. And then losing that. And it's like, okay, where do I go from here? Like now I'm the top dog and I go back home and where do I go? Like, first of all, the first thing I had to navigate was like, okay, what are my skills? Like I've been training to literally shoot guns, build demolition, and take the greatest killers on the planet into somebody's home and drop them. Like that's not a transferable skill in the civilian world. There's not a lot of people that will pay top dollar for that. I mean, on the black web maybe, but I'm trying to be legit here. So that was in itself a huge issue. And, you know, also I ended up getting in a lot of trouble with like the law because when I was in Ranger Regiment, you know, we were regarded as, you know, what we were. So it's like having a prized dog and you want to feed it and you don't want the dog to bite somebody. And if it does bite somebody, you're probably gonna be like, hey, let's, here's some money, you know, this is a prized dog. So when I got out, literally I was getting in trouble because I thought I was immortal. You know, I survived deployment. You know, I am an airborne ranger. Nothing bad's gonna ever happen to me. And like literally the day I got out of the Army, I ended up getting arrested for DUI. And like that was in itself like such a blow because, you know, the life I've been living the past 4 years prior, like we would drink and drive, like we'd work hard and we'd play hard, you know? So like you'd have a crazy work week and on the weekends you would just go crazy. You'd let loose. And, you know, we drank a lot as in the military, and that's just a big culture thing in the Army and in the Marines and in every military branch in general. Drinking is a huge cultural thing. So, you know, even more emphasized in Ranger Regiment. I remember we literally had a bar in our training area. Like it was upstairs, and we could drink at work if we wanted to. So the day I got home, I packed up my U-Haul on a Thursday. I got home on a Friday, went out Friday night, and got picked up for DUI Friday night. I was so used to, you know, there were times in Ranger Regiment where dudes would get picked up by the police and the police would just drive them home, you know, because they're like, oh, you guys are Rangers, we'll make sure you get home safety. And then, so that's what I'm used to. Then I get home, nobody gives a fuck. You know, nobody cares who you are. I don't know how many times I'd say, oh, I was a Ranger, and they'd be like, what national park? And I was like, I don't know Yogi Bear, you know, all I know is death. And it's like, dude, how do I don't know. Like none of these people, it fucked with me so much. And it's like, not only do I have this transition to where I was part of one of the greatest infantry units in the military. And now I am trying to figure out, I moved back in with my dad and I'm like, okay, I'm living at home. I was regarded as a member of one of the best infantry units in the world. Now I'm living at home, trying to figure out what jobs I'm qualified for on, you know, ZipRecruiter. I have no schooling. I have nothing. I could work for this security company and make 20 bucks an hour being a security guard. And luckily, before I got home, I did like block leave after the deployment. I met a guy who used to be in Ranger Regiment too, and he worked for a security company. And I was wearing like this low key, if you know, you know, type of Ranger shirt at the gym. And he saw it and he's like, "Are you a regiment?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I was too. I was at 175. When you get out and you need a job, hit me up." And he like gave me a job in security. So at least that was like, you know, if you're an infantry guy and you get out, you either go police force or you go executive protection. It's like one of two ways. So I went the executive route, but it was just like trying to navigate that with a DUI, and like my client was super far away, and like I was still having to drive my car because it's like I need to make money because, you know, this is survival mode now. And it's like now I'm dealing with all these issues, and like I'm still doing what I did in the Army. Like even after my DUI, I like went out to the bars with my buddies, and I'm like, there was just something super wrong. And then I remember I met my fiance on, she actually followed me on Instagram, like this smoking hot chick, just like, you know, that's cool, best feeling in the world, you know, when you're a guy and you see this smoking hot chick just follow you on Instagram and you're like, nice. So I ended up asking her out, and like, I remember we started dating a little bit, and she was a big reason why I was able to like calm down and like be like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Because I remember we were like on our third date, and she knew I was in the military, and she knew I was in the National Guard. She didn't really knew what I did. So like one day we were talking about it, I was talking about deployment, and I remember I was saying, I was like, my biggest regret in the military is that I didn't get to kill enough people, you know? And that's a big thing with a lot of guys, especially in the infantry, especially those guys that trained years to, you know, shooting human-shaped targets, being told they're killers, being told, you know, they're gonna go forward and crush the enemy, and dudes are getting pumped up, and then they're never able to do that, right? I got one hump out of that, and that wasn't my choice. And I feel like that's a really hard thing for guys to realize. Like, it wasn't your fault. You know, it's not like you got to choose how many deployments you went on. When you enlisted, you're like, oh, I think I'm gonna do 4. So, and the Army's like, well, I had 4 deployments. What's going on? I sat there and I was like, I didn't kill enough people. And then she goes, do you listen? Can you listen to yourself? She's like, do you listening to yourself? Do you know how absolutely insane that sounds? She's like, your biggest regret in your Army career is that you didn't get to kill enough people. To a normal person, that is like, that you're a psychopath, man. And I'm like, yeah, I really guess so. Like, I should probably go talk to somebody. And then, so it took me years. It took me years to literally like get out of that mindset. And it's like, okay, I got a DUI, and then I had to go to like veterans court to get it dropped. I ended up getting the entire thing dropped. It's off my record and everything, but I had to go to like AA classes for a year. I had to go to veterans court. Like I had to keep my nose clean for so long. And then I decided, like, one of the things about the DUI was I had to go to therapy for it, like for counseling. And after it was done, I decided to stay. Because it's just really nice to like talk to somebody about these things. And my counselor, he was a former Devil Dog, like he was an 0311 in the Marines, which is an infantry guy too, so he like got it. And I feel like that was a really hard thing for vets and like myself to do, because you talk to civilians and you're like, you have no fucking idea what I went through, you know? It's like this ego God complex that like, unless they went through the same thing that you did, that there's no way this person's gonna understand or offer me anything of value. So it was like that, but now, you know, I have a new counselor, and it's great. It's just so nice to be able to like talk about problems. So I chose to stay in counseling. I've been seeking for a lot of self-improvement. You know, I'm a pretty young guy, and like, I feel like a lot of people, especially those that get out of the military and combat MOSs, like, it's extremely hard to accept you're not that anymore. And I'm guilty of it sometimes when I'm like, oh, my entire personality is still being an airborne ranger, you know? It gave me really good tools, but also gave me a lot of toxic traits. And it's like, now I'm really dedicated to kind of navigating like what those are, and like what are some of the good things that I want to keep from the military. Because some dudes just get super salty. Like when I talk to guys about their experience, and like they start to realize like they're getting in trouble, and like they're having trouble with alcohol. Like I had trouble with alcohol. Like I could not understand when it wasn't beneficial anymore. Like all we did in the military was like, if we always had to be drinking when we weren't at work. It's like, how can I enjoy things without having alcohol? You know? And then it took me for my DUI to be like, yo, and then, you know, and then on top of that, I also got a firearms charge on top of everything. Like I was one after the other after the other. I went to jail for 3 days, and like had to share a cell with freaking drug addicts and gangbangers. And I'm like sitting here, if I didn't have these tattoos, like we'd have a problem, you know? Like I'm a young guy. And so I did 3 days in jail because I was on probation for the DUI. And then since I was working executive protection, I left my pistol that I was doing on an armed security gig underneath my seat. And then the next day I went to National Guard and was gone for 2 weeks, came back, forgot the gun was underneath my chair, and then got pulled over for no front license plate, because my Mustang, which I bought in Georgia, they don't require a front license plate. So I got pulled over, and the cop was like, hey, if you have anything in the car, I'm gonna search it. And I didn't even know I had my gun in the car, so I like I had a stick shift at the time, and I took my feet off the pedals after he like went back, and I gave him my registration, and I like kicked something underneath my seat, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? I like reached down and I grabbed the pistol, and I feel the pistol, like the grip, and I'm like, oh, we'll just keep this on the down low, maybe he'll forget. And like it was a Sunday, and I remember I was picking up work from my mom's construction company. So I was like going to do demolition at a construction site. So like my hair was all messy and like I didn't look appropriate, you know? And he comes back and he's like, hey, you know you're on probation, right? For alcohol, because that was part of my year, like get this shit dropped plan. And I'm like, yeah, I realize I'm on probation. He's like, okay, well the deal is, since you're on probation, I'm gonna do a search of your vehicle because I'm gonna make sure you don't have any alcohol. Do you have anything in the car you wanna let me know? And I was like, yeah, I have my firearm right underneath my seat. I just want to let you know. And he's like, okay, get out of the car. So I get out of the car and he finds it's right there under the seat. And then he handcuffs me. And I'm like telling him, I'm like, oh, I work executive protection. You know, that's from one of the jobs that I had. I was like, I'm in the National Guard, but since I just got off active duty, my CAT card expired and I didn't have an opportunity to get a new CAT card yet. So I don't have a military ID on me. So he's just like, this guy's a freaking liar. He just has a gun in his car. And I'm like talking to his partner, and I have like a Ranger sticker on the back of my car. And he's like, what sticker is that? I was like, oh, I was an airborne Ranger. And he's like, oh, nice, nice, nice. And then the guy like goes away and calls his sergeant, and he's just like, and I expect him to be like, hey, I got this veteran guy here, you know, he left his gun in his car, he's not supposed to have it in his car, he's on probation, what do you want me to do? But he like calls the sergeant and he's like, hey, I got a guy with a strap here, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, in my area, there's a lot of like Latino gang culture. It was like, I was living in like Moore Park, which is right next to the Oxnard, which is like the Nard. And so like, he ends up booking me for that because I ended up doing 3 days in jail with like the real Latino gangbangers, you know? And I remember it was just such a crazy time, and I got out and I'm like, that's it. Life's over, man. Life's fucking toast. I got a DUI, I got a weapons charge, I got thousands of dollars worth of legal fees now. I think I had 25 grand in legal fees just stacked up on top. And you know, fortunately, my family was big help in that. Like I owe them a lot. I finally got that taken care of, and like I thought that was it. You know, I literally fell from the top of the mountain, like Mount Olympus, right? Like where all the gods are. I was walking with giants, and just when I got out, I just fell to the ground and made an imprint really far. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna be able to climb out of this hole. You know, with the help of my fiance, who like put me on track, she's like, dude, you're super immature. You know, you could be the best military guy in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're the best person in the world, right? You could, like we had in Ranger Regiment, I talk about this with my Ranger buddies all the time, like some of the best Rangers we've served with, awful people, awful, terrible husbands, you know, just terrible people, but they are so good at their job. And it's like, I started to realize that and be like, okay, well, like what matters more, being a Ranger or just being a good person? So like I started transitioning that. So with the help of my fiance, like getting me on track, you know, cutting the drinking down a lot. I still do it occasionally, but like maybe once a month, like twice a month, just with friends. Like I prioritize my health and fitness. I started working on my career, you know, because I came up just on random opportunities in like the media side, and it's just kind of sprouted into this wildfire of, you know, different projects and everything. So, you know, just working on myself a lot and realizing like, dude, your military service is just a portion of your life. It's not my entire identity. You know, it's not my life. You know, coming down from that dark hole, I actually have my own Netflix show that's out now, and it's called Toughest Forces on Earth. It's myself and 2 other soft guys, and then we travel around the world and embed in different special forces in different environments, and we basically learn their tactics, their weapon systems, and what makes them great at, you know, what makes them some of the toughest forces on Earth. And like, I got that from my YouTube channel. It's called Shift Fire. I did it with my buddy Israel Wright, and we partnered with the production company to do it. And that was really pretty successful of just appreciating military culture. And then, you know, I ended up getting my business degree from Pepperdine University. I graduated honors, like, and this was all after, you know, getting a DUI and getting a gun charge in less than a year. And it's like, dude, we all hit setbacks, right? And it's One thing that regiment taught me, one thing that the military taught me is resilience, right? Whenever we have a problem, we figure out how to fix it. It's not the end of the world, right? So like skills like that, like resilience and leadership, not necessarily the hard skills, right? Shooting guns and blowing up. That's not what I took out of the military. What I took out of the military is in basic training, how did I figure out how to work with people from all different cultures? And leaders in Ranger School, how to make people do things when they're tired and hungry, right? How to be accountable, how to basically planning, preparation, all these soft skills that we learn in the military that are often overlooked. Those are the skills I use now, not the actual hard skills like driving tanks and doing all that stuff that people think the military only does. So that's pretty much what I'm working on now. We all come from different backgrounds, right? And the military is something that bonds a lot of people. I think it's a very positive thing. A lot of people tend to think it's negative, whether they experienced bad leadership, and everybody's experience is different. I think regardless of what experience you had, you now have brothers for life, brothers and sisters for life that you can depend on for anything, right? Don't be afraid to lean on your friends. Oftentimes especially me, oftentimes we think we can do everything alone, right? Because oftentimes in the military, we had to do things alone. Like when I went through RAS, it was on me. It was to be a good team member, but I have to be a good person first, right? The best followers are the best, or the best leaders are the best followers, right? So regardless of what you go through, you have people to lean on. Be somebody that someone can lean on. That's what I've found to be pretty impressive. And it doesn't really, regardless of what happens, there's always something on the other side. A loser like me can get a gun charge and a DUI and then have his own Netflix show. That's pretty cool, I think.